Good morning, Kim.
Good morning, everyone.
Hey, Kim, I just got your message. I'm glad you got it figured out.
Well, y'all, I guess I just had to be promoted to panelist. That was it.
Yeah. Mhm.
Thanks.
So, Mike, you have 5 committee members. You need 8 for a quorum. So,
Okay, I guess we can give it a few minutes, see if we can get 3 more people on.
That sounds like wonder to me. Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
Are we still going to introduce ourselves to the council?
I suppose we can. Let's see if we can get a quorum on board here.
Hey, Britton,
yes.
is there a way to call in as well? Can I communicate through the phone as opposed in terms of the audio instead of the computer?
I think in the webinar format, that's not an option.
Oh, really? Okay, that's fine.
It's
Sometimes I try and do that just so if the internet's a little spotty, at least my voice will continue to go
Gotcha.
correctly, but that's okay.
Also, Mike, it looks like we have 9 members. So you do have a quorum.
Okay. We have a quorum. Let's get started then. Good morning, everybody. Before we get started, I'd like to welcome everybody and ask patience on my part. This is my first time coordinating a Zoom meeting. I guess I'd say coordinating. We have a lot of staff help here facilitating. Since we have a quorum, let's go ahead and call the meeting to order. And then hopefully everybody had a chance to review the virtual meeting protocols that the council has adopted. And as a reminder, committee members, to be considered present, you must be on the camera and have your first and last name showing. Please have your microphones muted unless you're called on by the chairperson. Electronically raise your hand to request to speak and wait to be recognized. Once you're recognized, your microphone can turn on, and after you finish speaking, the microphone will return to mute. For the, any questions right now? Okay, so let's go ahead and go on to the approval of the January meeting summary. That was such a long time ago. Hopefully everybody's reviewed the January meeting summary, which was attached in the agenda received by email. And give everybody a few minutes to look that over. May I have a motion to adopt the meeting summary from January?
I'll make a motion to adopt the meeting summary.
Okay, Stephen has made a motion to accept the summary. Is there a second?
I would second it.
And Rosalind will second. Are there any recommended changes to the summary? Any public comments regarding the summary? All right, not having any, do I have any objections to approving the summary? Any abstentions to approving the summary? Okay, the motion to approve the summary passes without objection. First thing on the agenda is review of our contractual updates, which Sean, Brenton, and Ebony are gonna provide to us. Sean, would you like to start us off by giving an update on the partners and policymaking in the conference? I believe at the last meeting,
They're asking,
evals from both.
morning, Mike. I've got, so Hannah, if you can hear me, Jill's on the phone and she can't get in. So if you could send her an invite to the meeting, I'd appreciate it. I'm asking, okay, Jill? So, I mean, I've never been in y'all meetings. Apparently y'all requested these evaluations. So those are the evaluations from, I think, January, February, and March sessions of partners, is it, which y'all have linked in there.
Has everybody had a chance to review the partners of policymaking summaries, evaluation summaries?
I think Rosalind has her hand up.
Rosalind?
I really don't understand why is it like so many pages up on it. Is it all the same or are they different?
They're different pages from each partners in policy making meeting. it starts with the January and goes on through the March meeting. The dates are at the top right-hand corners. And of course, they didn't have any meetings after March because of the pandemic.
So it only goes up to like, the 6th and the 7th is the last time they met?
Last time the Partners in Policy Making met was March 6th and 7th.
That's if I read it right. 'Cause I was glancing through it, and that's what made me kind of ask about it.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
That's what made me ask the question, and that.
Okay. Yeah, that was their meeting because after that we were on the shelter in place through the pandemic. So
I have a question. Is that linked in the agenda?
it is a link in the agenda. Session summaries.
When I click on that, it takes me to the conference.
Maybe in Miss Hyper.
There is also a conference link, but the agenda that's online, whenever I click on the session summaries, it takes me to this here, the actual link. Also, Mike Kim has her hand up as well. I mean,
Mike.
I could email this to you directly, Stephen, if it's not showing up for you, if you like.
Yeah, I'm clicking on session summaries under Partners in Policy Making, and it's linking me to the navigating the system across the lifespan evaluation.
That's interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
I'll email it to you.
Do you see me?
We hear you, Jill.
Yeah, hold on. Haha.
I can hear you,
Start
Jill, but
video.
only thing I could see is
What?
Steve.
My name.
Now we can see you, Jill.
Hey, Jill.
Kim, you had a question?
Hey,
I did.
Lynn.
Who presented in March? There are no names for Act 378 and know about the legislative process.
That was me, Kim. Sean Fleming.
Okay, you did both?
I did most of those days. I have to look back. But I did a majority of the Friday and Saturday morning sessions I was involved in, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Brendan, do you know who could give us a recap of the conference eval? Would that be Sean as well?
That would be Mary Lee if anyone
Mary Lee.
had any questions. We weren't going to go through the entire form because they are kind of lengthy, but she's
Yes.
on the call to answer any questions if anybody has any about the conference.
So, where are we, y'all? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Jill, but I skipped on, and we should have went to the guidance for the FY21 Partners in Policy Making class.
I try to be so prepared and
It's
never
okay. Nobody is.
embarrassing myself.
Mike, if I may, one thing that came up after the the planning meeting related to partners, if we have partners in 21, just like we have had it, right now is the time we start soliciting applications for that class. And one of the bits of information and requirements is we usually establish dates of partners, which is two points to that, is asking applicants to commit to those dates, but also asking a hotel to commit to those dates. And with the suspension of in-person activities, it kind of puts us in a little quandary of when or how, whether we should establish contractual relations with a hotel, which they may not be as forgiving. With the council meetings, we had scheduled these meetings prior to the pandemic, knowing about the pandemic, but if we schedule them in the middle of the pandemic and say in January, February, whenever, we're still not having in-person activities, they could hold the council liable, responsible for those charges. It could be a cost with no real in-person activities. So that's one part of it. And the other part is the applicants typically commit to, and there's been a lot of discussion over the years related to participation in partners being one of the criteria for continued, for finishing a class. And so it's kind of hard to tell people they must commit if we can't, if we're uncertain of being able to have in person. So we wanted y'all guidance on that for the upcoming class.
And also, don't we need to make some consideration for the folks from the last class on whether they complete?
Yes, sir. Thank you. That's the second. Another consideration is whether they come in. I mean, we were thinking that give them credit, I guess, for what they've done and then let them finish it off this year. But whatever guidance y'all want to give on that as well. Okay.
Hey, Mike, we have a comment from Liz Gary. And she says, I would recommend that you move forward next year by allowing the class of 2020 to complete their last 3 sessions via Zoom to be able to complete their year. If the state opens back up in January, then you can determine whether or not to go back in person.
Okay, thank you for that, Liz.
I was thinking, is there any way, because of the extraordinary circumstances, you can have it the later part, like June till the second half of the month, and then I like the Zoom idea for the class of 2020, then as opposed to starting 21 in January and going through June, maybe make it March to September.
That may be a good idea as well.
Because okay, we got another public comment. If so, Brendan wants to read it.
Let's see. Looks like it's another one from Liz. Let me figure out where we left off. She said, in addition to her other comment, I do not think that you can consider a new class for next year under the circumstances. As Sean stated, everything should have started the recruitment by now for next year. It is It is too hard for anyone to commit to this program for next with uncertainties related to schools and opening the state back up.
That's true. And
point.
hotels don't even, like, it's so uncertain, but like, I do hate to just say, I don't know, y'all. Corona sucks.
And can we kind of divide this up into two things, and let's go ahead and address what finalizing the class of 2020, if we want to make some, choose a direction on that, and then
'Cause
move on to
it's
the class of
really,
21.
it really doesn't seem fair to be talking about 21 when the class of 20 only got half of section.
Hey, Mike, we have two more public comments.
Okay.
One from Coranda Corley. It says, I would recommend that we wait on addressing the upcoming year due to the increase in cases. I would also like to know if the Zoom option would actually be accessible to all individuals with disabilities, especially individuals with low incidence disabilities. And then another comment from Liz Gary, the program is powerful and the in-person sessions truly make the program work for the participants. She also said, great point, Jill. And I think Marilee has something she would like to share as well.
Is she?
And she's the program monitor for partners.
Okay.
Let's go ahead, Marilee.
So it's just the 5 of us today.
Jill, can we get Marilee's comments, please?
Sorry.
So, I just wanted to give you guys some information. So, Partners is in such a unique position right now because the 2020 class only completed 3 months, and we haven't started the process for the 2021 class like we normally would because of, as Sean mentioned, the lockdown on everything due to COVID. So I know that you mentioned, Mike, should we decide what we're doing with the 2020 class before we move on, or did you say the opposite, 2021?
No, I would like to, let's make it, this is just my thoughts is, let's make a decision on the 2020 class, whether we can finish that up via Zoom or not. And then to move on to making a decision on 2021, whether that's even feasible.
So in my mind, logistically, and this is of course at the will of the committee and then the council, had kind of like rolled it together. So instead of finishing the few sessions that the 2020 class missed, wrapping that up and then starting over in January, in my mind, logistically, I was thinking that when we start our next class, the 2020 participants that did not get to complete can skip the sessions that they missed. So they would skip January, February, March, and then they would start in April. Whereas the 2021 class would start in January. Or they could have the option to attend as well. I mean, that's all really up to y'all. But logistics wise, I think it would be simpler not to do half of one and then a whole one when you could combine them. The planning committee funded it. They had ideas about in-person versus online. And they had ideas about the 2020 participants who didn't complete, that I think that they wanted them to definitely be able to complete. And I think it's important to note that some of the 2020 participants in the last session in March did not make it to the March session because people were starting to get sick and not feeling well. And I think that the executive committee wanted to make sure that they were included despite the fact that they were missing the March one. So, I mean, I would really defer to the people that have the partners expertise. I would put a lot of weight in whatever Liz recommends because she was the coordinator for so long. From what I've experienced, I think when you're in person, you create a rapport and an atmosphere that, as I'm watching, seems to be very beneficial to that group. And I don't know if you could create that online. So that's something to consider. And then, of course, you can do online without having a venue or breaking any COVID protocols, but it would be online. And I'm not sure that you would develop the rapport, like I mentioned, how even practical that would be for moms and dads. A lot of these people, they come and it's kind of, they're not with their family, so they're able to focus fully on what they're doing at Partners. So that's just the information I wanted to give y'all, because it seemed like we jumped into this discussion. So I wanted you guys to be informed of all the facts that I had to share. Timeline wise, at this point, we normally have booked hotels and speakers. In early August, we announced the graduating class and then we advertised for next year. And then in September, we advertise again for next year. And then the application period closes September 30th. October, the selection committee meets, they select. You send out letters, some people can't. You send out a second round of letters if you have a backup list, and then the sessions start in January. So just consider all of that information, how the timeline normally works and where we are. And I just wanted to share that with you guys because it seems like we're diving into that discussion. And that's all I had, unless anybody has any questions.
Hey, Mike, we have a few hands raised and a public comment from Coranda and a question from Brenda. So I don't know which order you want to go in first. But as far as committee members, Lillian and Stephen have their hands raised, and Liz Gary also has her hand raised.
Okay, let's start with Lillian.
So as far as the connection part goes, I think there probably will be a concern as far as the Partners 2020 class finishing virtually because it did start in person. I do want to mention that I attended Oklahoma's Youth Leadership Forum last month virtually, and there were a lot of concerns on whether or not the same atmosphere could be created online versus in person because it has the same, it needs the same sort of connection as Partners because it was created as a stepping stone before Partners. But the connection was still there. The magic of YLF was still there. It was really, surprisingly, we were able to reconnect that magic over online. So I think considering having Partners 2021 online isn't a terrible idea to try. But my question to you guys would be, do we know what other states are doing with their Partners program with COVID in consideration, like for 2021?
I don't know. Does anyone else on staff maybe know? Or that may be something we could check into?
So as far as I know, I don't think I've not heard of anyone planning anything. We can certainly reach out to kind of the state that heads up Partners and see if they have any ideas. Another option is, and I think Liz would be more familiar because this was done a few years ago, as I understand. I think the issue was there weren't enough applicants, so partner applicants to make a full Partners class, so they did like regional visits. Now these people didn't graduate, they weren't a Partners in Policymaking graduate, but the information was put out across the state. So that's something else to consider.
Thank you, Mary Lee. Stephen?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
So I don't know if this was discussed already, but how about we let the current class decide what they want to do as far as whether they want to complete the class via Zoom, offer that opportunity. But also if they don't want to do Zoom, we can also offer them to take it again the following year whenever the state deems it safe. So maybe we can start after the third week or whatever, wherever they left off, and kind of let them decide what they want to do and what they're comfortable with doing. And I believe Mary Lee answered my question that I had about why the numbers for the evaluations were a lot lower in March compared to January. So thank you.
That was why. Because people were sick and stuff like that was happening.
Right. Liz, Gary?
Thank you, Mike. So first off, as far as going back to what I had stated about doing the Zoom online with the ones that have already gone through it. Clearly, since the numbers were low in March, that means that very few people got the full impact of January, February, March being one of the most powerful parts of it, where you learn to actually testify and you actually learn to do the mock testimony and stuff like that. I think it makes sense to still give them the opportunity if they want to move forward for that with the Zoom next year. You could also incorporate what Mary Lee said as far as using the money instead of for partners next year, use that portion for them to finish and the other portion to use the money to possibly do similar to what was done in 2016 where we didn't have a class. But I think you will lose a lot if you merge a brand new class with the class remaining and put the two of them together, where you would start a new class in January and then let the other ones join in April, May, and June, because bonding is huge with these classes. There's a lot of shared, there's a lot of emotions. And I think if you merge in two classes together and bringing those in April, May, and June to ones that were already there and connected in January, February, March, I think it's going to be a very difficult situation to maintain, a very difficult position for bonding and sharing and keeping the stuff that stays in those rooms So I would not recommend merging two classes together in that aspect. But I do think that if you were to do anything, consider letting the ones that have finish April, May, and June, and then also create the environment where you could use online Zoom resources and trainings with some of the same speakers and do that statewide so that people could join and use the dollars for that and then reconsider bringing partners back in for 2022. But I don't think there's any way you can pull off and you're going to get any commitment from families for next year to be able, one, no way you're going to get them to come in person. It's too scary, especially with their lives they're facing and the children. And second, even if you could get a commitment, I don't think we're going to be open to be able to do that and for people to be comfortable. So I would, that's just my opinion. That's 11 years of the Partners Program, 11 years of knowing how to plan it and just trying to give some feedback as to what I think would work best moving forward under the situation. Thank you very much.
So Liz, that makes a lot of sense. So I retract my original, I mean, logistically it would be easier, but I think it makes total sense what you said about, because they do develop so much rapport, like in session one, right off the bat. And then you'd have these new people that you haven't met and you may not be comfortable with. So I agree with that. Whenever you said that, so whenever you mentioned 2020 finishing just April, May, June, did you mean April, May, June 2021 or 2022?
Oh, no, 2021, but they don't necessarily have to finish it in April, May, June. My thought was you could still bring in the same speakers for April, May, and June, but bring them in February, March, April, whatever for next year, starting on the Zoom panels. This crew already knows each other. They've already bonded. I'm not saying it's ideal situation, but if you want to be able to get them to complete without having to start all over and put them into 3 extra sessions that they've already completed, then I think that could be the potential best way to keep them and give them what they want and still give them the speakers there, just do it virtually online.
And then, but the other concern with that is I'm not sure what you would do with the people who missed March because they were sick.
Well,
you have to do March again, and then I don't even know
Well, how are you going to do March again if everything's shut down and you're not able to do the session? And then remember, Marilee, March was one of those dates that was told that if you didn't make it, it's mandatory to be there. And I understand under the situation, but those people always would have an opportunity to reapply and come back in 2022. That was always there and available for those who were not able to complete. And we've had several people in the past who weren't able to complete for reasons and did come back the following year, apply, and were accepted.
Yeah, I mean, that was my point, is saying, how could you do the March one? I mean, I don't, like you said, with everything closed, I don't think it would work online. But I do, my notes from the executive committee is, I think and I don't know if somebody is here that was on the executive committee, but I have down that their general takeaway was that if somebody missed because they were sick, it shouldn't be like it regularly is, where if you miss the March one, you're done, because it was, I mean, the coronavirus, you know what I mean?
Right. No, I understand. But remember, based on the procedures and policies, it stated that if you miss that March session because you're missing the main point of what the whole program is about, that you weren't able to continue. I totally understand that it's the coronavirus and everything, but if you can't recreate that and you want to move forward with your people to be able to finish with those sessions they didn't complete, then I think, I mean, look, these are just my recommendations. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying, based on the policies and procedures, we didn't make a whole lot of exceptions in the past, and I understand COVID, but at the same time, I think that they could still move forward the next year and get a lot more impact from that. That's just my opinion.
Okay.
Thank you.
I don't know if
Thank you, Liz.
has any questions or anything to ask Liz or myself. I gave you all the information I have, and I think she gave you guys a lot of good information as well.
Thank you, Mary Lee. Brenton, is there any other comments or?
Chris has his hand up, as well as Coranda. Coranda also had a comment, but I think she can mention that when she speaks. And then Brenda Casse had a comment asking if the committee received the recommendations from the FY21 Planning Committee with regards to partners.
So the plan, my takeaway was that the Planning Committee funded it. I didn't get any firm recommendations. Is anybody here that was on the Planning Committee? No. So that's what they did.
Okay, thank you. Chris?
Yeah. Hi. So just a point of clarification. I'm sorry, I was on the Planning Committee. Just so nobody gets frustrated, we had this, it sounds like this exact same conversation and debate has taken place in probably 3 committees. This one, the Planning Committee, and it sounds like the Executive Committee. I'm unsure as to who's making the decision, and so that people don't get frustrated after having a long debate about it and then realizing a decision's actually already been made by a different one. Presumably this is a conversation that's probably going to be had again in front of the entire council. I think seems to be a lot of opinions and good discussion.
So that's a great point. I have no idea.
Right, because we had this exact conversation in the Planning Committee with the exact same points. And I thought a decision was made. I just don't want folks to have additional conversations only to find out the decision's already been made, or the Planning Committee having that discussion only to realize that it's really not in their jurisdiction.
Well, I'm gonna step out, because I was really just here to answer questions and give you guys information. I'll let y'all work through that. And I'm here if there's any further questions.
So yeah, Kim Bazile has her hand up as well. And for our guest, Coranda still has her hand up.
Yeah, Coranda. Coranda, go ahead.
Yes, great morning.
Morning.
Or yes, it's still morning. Great morning. I want to acknowledge several points. Yes, I'm very interested in the point that that Miss Brenda and Chris and Mr. Chris, Miss Brenda Casse and Mr. Chris, I'm sorry, Mr. Chris, I think your last name is Rodriguez. Mr. Christopher Rodriguez both brought up, what was addressed on that plan. If we don't know that, then we shouldn't even move forward on it. Secondly, addressing partners in policymaking and some of the things that Ms. Liz Gary stated. In partners in policymaking, they also have to abide by the laws dealing with racial and inclusion diversity. And I would like to know if the individual that's currently the coordinator can actually inform us of how many self-advocates we actually have attending this class, as well as how many people that fall up under the minority groups are actually currently enrolled in this class. Because if we don't meet the criteria of having that actually addressed, then it would behoove our council, whom is still currently under a federal and state decree, to actually make sure that inclusion and diversity is being addressed under all facets to affect our funding, that we actually make sure that it's being addressed also in partners in policymaking. In partners in policymaking, when I attended it, we only had 4 individuals that were in minority groups, which was including myself, and 2 self-advocates, which 1 did not complete. So I think that if we're going to try to move forward with partners in policymaking, we have to make sure that self-advocates and minority populations are actually represented in our partners in policymaking classes, as well as we have to make sure that this partners in policymaking class is going to be very disability friendly, because Zoom and a lot of the other platforms are not catering to people with low incident disabilities, such as visual impairment, such as those that need switches, etc. So I think that that's something that is pertinent that we should actually consider before we even try to move forward with this partners policymaking class and any other class thereafter in the midst of this pandemic.
Hey, Korhonda, thank you.
It's Korhonda.
Korhonda, I've never been able to say it right, and I've read your name on so many different places. So
no problem.
I just think that's a really good point, the accessibility point that you made. So I wanted to say that, if it is Zoom. And I actually, whenever the selection committee met for 2020 Partners in Policymaking, they did pay special attention. I think, Mike, you were there, Bambi was there. I'm not sure if Bambi's here now. They paid special attention to the factors that you mentioned. And I actually broke out from the selected applicants, like the percentages, self-advocates versus parent, their region, their gender, and then the minority representation. So I can say I'm confident that they took that into account. I don't know if that helps. And I think it's good to keep on the forefront as well.
Right, and I would greatly appreciate if our chairman, Mr. Billings, if you can make sure that that information is actually put on the record so that we can actually have that breakdown put in record so that we can actually know how many self-advocates and how many individuals that are minorities are actually in our partners in policymaking class. And if that is not fitting our quota on what we actually need, then we actually need to restart that whole entire class for this year.
So I have it pulled up. I don't think I can share my screen, but I can read it to you. And then I think it would be on the record if that is what the committee would like.
Sure, but I'd also like to point out that we have no control over who applies.
Yeah, so that's right. I mean, that you get the applications you get. Things to consider, which I've heard brought up before, is how to reach out to minority areas and communities who may not hear about partners. That would be something you could do to ensure that perhaps your number of applicants from that population increase.
Definitely an area to work on.
And Mr. Chairman, Mr. Billings, if you don't mind me saying something else, I would also like to say that we're not making these applications available to people that does not have English as their primary language or as their first language. We're not making these applications available to them in their native language, whether it is Spanish, Arabic, etc. We're not providing that. So I would greatly appreciate if we can actually make sure that we make this program accessible to all. And that is a problem that we're actually having. This information is not being accessible to those that are living in rural communities, nor is it being accessible to those that live in minority communities. So I think that if we're gonna make advocating a priority, especially in partners in policymaking, and that's what they focus on, then we have to make sure that we're addressing all of our populations as required under the federal law.
Duly noted. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I believe we had Brenda still waiting.
Well, that was partly addressed. Her comment was if the committee had received the recommendations from the fiscal year 21 planning committee with regards to partners. And I think Chris kind of mentioned that, how a lot of this conversation is just a repeat of what was had in that committee. Also, just people that are sending comments via the chat, if you can just remember to select all panelists and attendees, that way everyone participating can see your comments. And Kim Bazile has had her hand up for a minute.
Yes, Kim.
I'd like to suggest, since we've spent so much time on this subject, that maybe it would be good to set up an ad hoc committee for the people that know partners best to discuss it and to make decisions, and then they can bring it forward to us. When's the next? In October, to the full council, and they can recommend to us what would be the best thing to do.
Would you want to put that into a motion format?
I would, if you think, yes.
I just want to say my only concern with that is you're pushing back your timeline pretty far. So
personally, I don't think that we will have a full new class next year. I just don't think that's feasible. So aren't we really discussing what would happen with this year's class?
Right. So let's say we are. And so let's say we go with Liz's suggestion where we recreate April, May, and June. And if we don't discuss that until August, do you see how that pushes back? And then pretty soon you're going to be running into when you should have started planning that. Does that make sense? Just information to consider.
I do understand what you're saying.
Chris has more information than I have about all these other committees that have talked about it. I don't know.
So, yeah, I was gonna say, haven't these decisions already been made? Kim, weren't you on the planning committee? Didn't we decide to fund whatever? Like,
we decided to fund partners, but I don't think we ever discussed on how it would look.
right, maybe you're right. But I do remember having this exact conversation with the same points. I thought I assumed we had come to a conclusion.
And if we did, my memory's very poor.
I'm with you on that. I don't remember what it was, but I do remember a very robust conversation with all these points that were made. And presumably I thought that a decision was made. And I don't know which committee is supposed to be making these decisions. And if this was just meant to be an update on what's going on, or if this was meant to be a discussion that was supposed to produce a decision.
Well, there usually is a partner selection committee that is set up. I don't recall what time of the year, but it's probably about right now is when they would select the new group.
No, they select in October.
October, okay.
The application period closes September 3rd.
That's right, at the end of September.
And so then as soon as staff can compile all the applications and kind of sanitize them and break them up by all of their different demographic information, then and the planning committee has a date where they can all meet, then they meet. So it's usually mid-October, maybe even late October.
Right.
But I get what you're saying now, Kim. So in other words, if we're saying we're definitely not doing 2021, we'll recreate 3 months, let's say in like January, February, March. Is that what you were saying? Like, in other words, there's not a tight time frame.
Right, because I don't foresee a new class starting in January. You know, maybe there might be a new class that starts in July and we move it to the second half of the year, but maybe we need a partners committee to decide what's the best way partners should look next year.
I got you.
So presumably there's going to be like a report out from the planning committee at the full council meeting next week, right? Let's say that's going to
There should
This
be.
is probably like, I don't know that this committee is the right place to like form another committee, but Kim, I think that's a great idea to bring up and the whole committee. And I would agree with, that sounds like a good idea based on people who know the program best. So I think it'd probably be a really great recommendation to make next week in front of the entire council, to build a committee and do whatever I think is right.
Okay, then let's wait and discuss it next week at the council.
Hey, Mike, you have two comments. The first is from Liz Gary. She says the decision was made to fund, but no decision had been made as to how to move forward. I think she's referencing the planning committee. I think I remember someone stating that we needed to bring this to the self-determination committee and the full council, but no decision had been made as to how to move forward with partners. Karonda Corley, she also has a comment, says how many self-advocates and minorities will be included in the ad hoc committee recommended by Ms. Bazile. Since no one seems to recall the pertinent information regarding this issue, then can a motion be made to revisit the situation after that information is provided? And just to share, as far as this committee goes, self-determination, I mean, that you regularly get updates from partners. So it is, if it is your will to make whatever recommendations you want to the full council, as far as how you think this class should look next year, that typically recommendations about partners typically do come out of this committee. So if y'all want to, that's up to you.
Well, I think we need to consider whether we want to make a recommendation on the 2020 class on how for them to finalize, and whether we want to make a recommendation for postponing 2021 and moving to 2022 or whatever y'all want to do. But we've been on this subject for quite some time, and it's very important, but we just kind of need to steer ourselves in one direction or another.
So I guess I thought that the decision that you guys were leaning towards was to bring to the full council meeting a recommendation to create a partners committee. So then that would close it up right now.
That's what I was hoping to do, but I don't know if that's what this committee would like.
If you want to put that into a motion format, we can move it along.
Yes, I would like to make a motion that this committee presents to full council next week the suggestion that we hold a partners in policy making subcommittee, an ad hoc committee, to discuss how partners will look next year and possibly even 2022. And if anyone needs to massage that, please do.
I think that sounded great. I second.
Okay, we have a motion to bring before the committee formation of an ad hoc committee for partners in policy making, and it was by Kim, and it was seconded by Chris. Are there any public comments?
I'm trying to capture it. Y'all just bear with me as I type this up for y'all.
Chris is not on this committee.
Oh, that is correct. Yes, Chris.
Sorry.
He's here to present on some information, but he's not a member of the committee.
Yeah.
So we would need a second by someone else.
Sorry about that.
Hannah, would you like to second?
I could second it.
Thank you, Rosalind.
Welcome.
Kim, what I have on screen, I mean, is that kind of capture what you were saying? Can y'all see it?
I can.
Yeah, I think that captures what I intended.
So I'm just gonna jump in. So,
Yeah.
so
Excuse me for a second. You know, you spelled her name wrong. Kim's last name wrong because it's highlighted in underneath her last name. It has like a red squiggly little line. Yeah.
Yeah, it's spelled correctly, but just it's not a common word that is used in this software, so it just shows up as misspelled. But thanks for noticing that, though, Rosalind.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
I'll do this. Bam.
Kim, jump in.
See, you went away. See, I was right for it.
Brendan, is your computer about to die or is mine? Because my screen just got really dark, but all I see is your screen.
Usually whenever I share a screen, it'll take over your screen, but typically if you hit escape, it'll reduce the size of my shared screen and still give you access to other things on your computer.
Okay, I'm dying. Y'all hang on.
Jill, do you mind muting?
Sorry, Michael.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so right now we have the motion by Kim and seconded by Rosalind.
I think the motion needs to be clear to discuss how to complete the 2020 class. And then to discuss the 2022 class. I'm not sure that would be clear for the full committee, and then it would may lead to further discussion.
I'm sorry, I was trying to keep up with comments that are coming in. Can you repeat that, please?
I know, Benson, I'm sorry, you have a lot that you're doing at once.
How about to discuss, I thought I said how to discuss how partners in policymaking should look for 2021 and possibly 2022. And so that way, I thought, in my opinion, that takes into account finishing 2020, starting possibly 2021. But if y'all don't read it that way.
Oh, see, I thought that you guys were leaning towards we're not doing partners in 2021. We'll finish the 2020 class and then we'll do 2022 partners. Tell me if that's wrong. That's not what you meant.
Well, I think that this ad hoc committee needs to decide all of these questions. That's why I want to leave it as open as possible.
Right. Okay. Kim, maybe changing the wording to add in finalizing the class of 2020.
Perfect. Yes.
Motion, but
no. I'm good with that.
Rosalind, are you still a good second on that with the change as it's changed?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
I'm cool with it.
All right.
I'll say you do have some comments, Mike. In the chat, Kim had stated the chairperson of said committee or the council chair makes all appointments to all committees. And then there was a question from Brenda Cosse. It's kind of long, so if you guys want to read through it in the chat, but I'll read it. But could the Partners in Policy Making Ad Hoc Committee consider, and then she quoted, the committee developed initial recommendations for the federal fiscal year 2021 plan, which included amounts allocated to activities for People First, Partners in Policy Making, and LACAN, implementation strategies for how to proceed with resuming Partners in Policy Making and relationship and sexual abuse exploitation training, and introduce new concepts related to supported decision-making, emergency preparedness and rapid response efforts, and addressing police tactics and approaches. And then she has dated June 29, 2020, LADDC Program Manager Courtney Ryland, DDC website. So I guess that is taken from the summary from the planning committee.
Yeah, it looks like.
But I would say, yeah, I mean, if the council approves this motion and starts this ad hoc committee, I guess that would be their will to come back with a recommendation for, you know, figuring out how that class would work.
Yeah, correct. Do we have any other comments?
Not that I see. I believe that is everything.
And just like a point of clarification. So if y'all do an ad hoc committee, and I think it is wise that y'all include people outside of the council on that committee. The guidance we've received from the feds is only council members can direct council funds. And so it will require that ad hoc committee to submit a recommendation back to this committee of the full council, or at least the executive committee, for determining a course of action, so that you have council members making that decision. Is all. Just to make sure that's clear to y'all in terms of timeframes of what y'all are going to do.
All right, thank you, Sean. Okay, so do we have any objections to the motion? Any abstentions? Okay, the motion passes without objection and will be presented to the full council. Okay, so now we're next on the agenda is the, let me find my place here. Looking in two different places, sorry.
You would be, just since we have Marilee on, if there were any questions about the conference evaluations, and then you can go into LaCan after that.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Marilee? Okay, is Ebony on to give us an update on LaCan and Families Helping Families?
I'm here.
Hi, Ebony.
Hi, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So I'm gonna be coming from the status of plan activities. That's on the website. It wasn't included in your on the agenda. It's just normally in your packets, but it is on the website if you guys want to follow along. But I'll just give you some updates about LaCan. It's on page 3 of the status report if you do pull it up. Currently, there are vacancies in regions 110 and region 4 for LaCan leader positions. In January, the committee recommended that we advertise with vocational rehab agencies. I did contact the regional manager for region 1, and we did send out advertisements to the local LRS agencies on the West Bank, New Orleans, and St. Tammany. Both positions are currently being advertised on the council website as well. And as of today, we have 1 applicant for region 4, and an interview has been set up for later this month. We don't have any applicants for region 1 and 10. So until we receive applications or fill the positions, members in regions 1 and 10 will contact FHF New Orleans, and members in region 4 will contact FHF Acadiana for more information about LaCan. But As always, if you all know anyone that's interested in applying for LaCan or becoming a leader, please send them our way, or they can find the application located on the website under LaCan Leaders. Does anybody have any questions about that?
Looks like Rosalind has her hand up.
Rosalind, go ahead.
Yeah, but like what, all right, on what subject from, like different, how can I say it? Different, like from region, is that like from region 4? And you trying to really explain it from LACAN, or does it? Oh, how can I don't know how I'm trying to go with it.
So are you
For
talking
what
about the
purpose?
application, or so we FHF Acadiana and we're advertising for the positions on our website? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that was one of them. But there is another one you was also kind of talking about too. But I was trying to find it and I couldn't find it for what you was talking about as well. But I'm a little confused on it. I was trying to follow you and I couldn't follow you.
Okay. So which part did you get lost?
Is it in, did you put it in the packet or no?
Oh, okay. You're talking about where I am. So it's in the status of planned activities. You can follow along or you can just listen to the update. If you wanted to follow along, it's on the website. It's called,
That's great.
yeah.
And then that explains why totally in my field, but I'm trying to follow you, but I'm lost.
Yeah, if you look on the website, it's the status of planned
Can somebody pull up the website for me, please? I would appreciate that.
I think Brenton is going to pull it up for us.
Because I'm totally lost.
Can I also be linked in the comments? Thank you.
Also, Crystal has her hand raised.
Morning, Crystal, go ahead.
Hey guys, can y'all hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
So I wanted to talk about our recruitment for LaCan. And I wanted to say that I was thinking about, I think a great place for us to recruit for more diversity would be our new SEAC committees that are across the state. There's a great, robust committee that's in Jefferson Parish for regions 1 and 10. And I think that they're very active. Those parents are very well versed with disabilities, developmental disabilities. And I think I would like for us to consider speaking about adding that to the list of people that we reach out to recruit for membership and LaCan leaders. And the SEAC committees, I don't know if everybody knows, SEAC is the Special Education Parent Advisory committees, the SEAP and SEACs across the state that consist of a majority of parent members. So I would like to include them whenever we send out recruitment on our list of people to recruit to. Sorry, guys, I'm all over the map today.
Can you tell us what that stands for again?
Absolutely. So, so each individual district has a special education parent advisory committee by law now last year that passed. So it started in Jefferson Parish a few years ago, if I remember correctly. And then a law passed last year to model what they had going on across every single district. So I sit on the one for Ascension Parish for my district, but each committee has to be a majority of parent members, and they have to they make recommendation to the superintendent of each district to advise on special education needs. But the parents are all who sit on these committees, they're all parents of children with disabilities. So I think that's a great place to recruit because those groups are already diversified by law as well. So I think, you know, along with recruiting for LaCan leaders and for our membership into the council, that those would be great places to also include in our recruitment.
Thank you, Crystal. It's a good idea.
I guess, should I make a motion, Mike? Is that something I need to do to motion so that we can talk about it as a full council and ensure that that happens?
That would get it before the full council, yes.
Okay, so I'd like to make a motion that we recommend to the full council that we include the SEEP and SEAC committees and as part of our outreach for recruitment for LaCan and membership to the council. Mary Lee, did that encompass it? Do you feel that that was good wording? And Ebony, I'd like to get y'all's feedback on that motion to make sure I encompassed everything. Thank you.
Yes, I felt like you encompassed everything. Brenton is probably going to be the one that's taking the motion. So I don't know if he's going to share his screen with the motion on it, but yes, I felt like that encompassed what you were trying to convey.
Okay, great. Thanks. And thanks, Brenton. If somebody from staff could just help me out with that, I want to make sure I'm making a clear motion.
Yeah, I'm trying. Sorry, I had a bog down on my computers. I'm pulling the document back up. So wording wise, you wanted to include SEEP and the Special Education Parent Advisory Committees in the recruitment of LaCan leaders?
For LaCan leaders and council membership.
Okay.
I would also include partners in policy making recruitment efforts as well.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Absolutely.
You would need a second on that.
Brenton, can we spell out SEEP, please?
I think it's SEAC, S-E-A-C. Isn't SEAP the statewide?
Yeah, Kim, I think they should be included as well.
Oh, I'm
statewide
sorry, I
and the
missed that.
individual one.
I'm sorry, I missed that. Thanks.
So I mean, we're throwing out, we have the special education advisory panel, the special education parent advisory committees. Is it named something else?
No, I think by law they're called SEAC. The SEACs are the committees that are at the district level, and SEEP is at the state level. So I think that would encompass everything.
Okay. And then the partners in policy making class or classes.
Yes, and the
Brenton
recruitment.
Bambi I'm sorry, Crystal. Brenton Bambi is saying special education. Oh gosh. Take out
Advisory.
parent and committee, special education advisory committee is what Bambi said.
Special education.
Advisory. So take out the word parent. There you go.
And that's,
So that's what's at the district level.
Yeah.
yes, SEAC.
That's- yeah.
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
And when, I got a question. When it's referencing partners in policy make, oh, okay, it's basically alumni, PIP alumni is that what you were thinking, Stephen?
No, I was just thinking like for recruitment of partner in policy making.
Oh, I think he's saying like in the recruitment of Lacan leaders, council membership, and partners in policy making.
Yeah.
Oh, so it should go at the end. Okay, I see what you're saying.
I believe there is a chat from Karonda Corley. The question is, how will we address the school systems, charters, private and parochial schools whom do not have the special education advisory committees? Second, will that change the role in which they are serving on that committee? Lastly, how will we ensure the information is dispersed to the masses, including self-advocates and minorities? I will say, as far as the makeup of that committee, that would, I don't know if that would be something that they would need to address in the education committee. But as far as the recruitment, I mean, I think what they're discussing currently is how they are trying to recruit to the masses. I mean, we push it out via our websites. We usually get our FHF centers to share it. We've tried to connect people with, I think it was what was it, Ebony, the Ticket to Work program or some of the voc rehab places?
The vocational rehab agencies.
Right, we've advertised there. But I think Crystal has her hand up as well.
Crystal?
I just want to say, you know, I have sat back and tried to think about our recruitment and how we can reach more people. But me personally, and I'm sure the council and this committee feels this way, we are open to suggestions, especially from the public. So if anyone has any suggestions, I would love to hear them. I feel like this was a good starting place, but we can always do better. So I just wanted to mention that.
We also have another comment, Mike, from Bambi Palazzola that says, doesn't the executive committee have an agenda item to discuss and address diversity? And that is correct. I believe they're going to discuss that at, I think it's their Tuesday meeting.
Tuesday, yes.
So there is a motion on the floor. We don't have a second that I'm aware of. Just as a point of order.
Crystal, are you okay with the wording of your motion now?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor by Crystal, and we are looking for somebody to second.
A second.
Oh.
Okay, I think that was Michelle. Beat you at the buzzer, Stephen.
Barely.
So we have a motion by Crystal and seconded by Michelle.
Really? Do you have to always have to be negative? Really?
Do we have any public comment?
It looks like Crystal's hand is raised. I don't know if that's from earlier or if it's raised again.
That's from earlier. My apologies.
No problem. I'll
Thank you.
take care of it. And
I still can't find how to raise my hand. Like, there is no option.
so Jill, there should be 3 little buttons. Everyone's screen looks a little bit differently, but there's usually 3 buttons. And when you click on that button, it gives you the option to raise your hand.
What 3 buttons? Oh. Like in my box?
If you go to participants, Jill, yeah, so there should be an invite button, a mute all button, and then there's a button that has 3 dots on it.
I see what you showed me, Stephen. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'll mute now.
Rosalind has her hand raised. I'm not sure if she has a question or not.
I do.
Go ahead,
All
Ross.
right. If I'm reading this right on the screen, and that, are we going to skip next year? Partners in a policy making class of next year?
That was a previous motion, Rosalind.
All right. Well, that's why I'm asking. But do we have to find, all right, since that one is the previous one, on this one, we have to find how many leaders in LA can for this one? And the partners in, does the partners in policy making people too has to have leaders as well?
So no, right now there are 2 vacancies, Rosalind. There's 1 vacancy in regions 1 and 10, and then there's 1 vacancy in region 4. So Crystal's motion is so that we can reach more people to recruit with the special education advisory panel and the special education advisory committees, so that we can maybe get a new leader for regions 1 and 10. But we do have an interview scheduled for later this month for region 4 with an applicant before.
Then how did they skip region 4? And why is it that window right there open? And it's like, from 1 through 10 has their leaders?
So no.
If I'm understanding you right.
Right now, regions 1 and 10 do not have a leader.
All right, so I wasn't sure if I was understanding you right on it, because for me, I thought you were saying only on region 4. And I guess I was misunderstood where you was coming from.
Okay.
Just a point of clarity, we do have a motion on the table, so we need to have a discussion about that motion. We could always partner with you after the meeting, Rosalind, to kind of clear up anything about your situation.
So what's the this motion right here is on? Are we going to have the motion going right now?
Yes, Rosalind, we have the motion on the floor right now from Crystal, seconded by Michelle, for the committee, this committee to recommend including the Special Education Advisory Panel and the Special Education Advisory Committees in the recruitment of LACAN members, council members, and partners in policymaking participants.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
And I do agree. I do agree on that for what's there.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So do we have any more public comment?
We don't have anything in the chat that I see.
Okay. We have any objections? Any abstentions? Okay, this motion is passed.
Okay, so I'll just keep going on with the LACAN update. For advocacy activities, as you all know, our council follows the federal fiscal year, October 1st through September 30th. So since October 1st, there have been 6 action alerts and 500 actions taken. I'm not sure if you guys checked your email, but as of yesterday, there is now an active alert for Bessie that was sent out yesterday afternoon, and it'll remain active until July 13th. So please don't forget to take action on that action alert. There have also been 2 yellow shirt days with 6 participants. As you know, due to COVID, we were not able to have yellow shirt days at the Capitol during regular session this year. So the 2 yellow shirt days were Bessie, our seat that happened earlier this year. Due to COVID-19, we are currently hosting leader calls once a week to ensure our leaders are up to date on current issues. We also collaborate with the leaders and FHF directors on the development of strategies to better support, maintain, and lead LACAN members. And we're currently collaborating on ideas for sharing testimonies via video, conducting legislative visits via Zoom, and reconstructing our roundtables. For legislative session and LACAN debriefing, due to COVID-19, the leaders and members, as I said earlier, were not able to participate in yellow shirt days at the Capitol. However, before session and right before the pandemic that caused the social distancing and the stay-at-home orders, leaders were able to complete 56 legislative visits. So our regular session ended on June 1st. And our LACAN leaders and FHF directors met on June 29th via Zoom for the 2020 legislative debriefing. As you guys know, our debriefings are held annually after sessions. So staff and leaders and FHF directors, they get together, they discuss advocacy outcomes, strategies to use that are effective, and where we can improve. So this year we discussed our advocacy outcomes via Zoom, where everyone was able to participate. The leaders and directors also discussed ways for changing the format of roundtables. A lot of the ideas were to individualize each roundtable to fit that region's, So I think, like for example, Region 6 felt like their roundtable should be less formal, like more of a town hall meeting, versus Region 9, who wanted to continue with the formal presentation by the DD Council staff. So we'll talk about more of that in our weekly LACAN calls with the FHF directors and the LACAN leaders. More ideas were to have possibly joining forces with other disability groups, so legislators aren't so overwhelmed or confused during legislative visits, conducting visits via Zoom, as I said earlier, and sharing testimony via video. We also discussed continuing to get input from the community for the council's 2021 advocacy agenda, and leaders will be hosting regional community input meetings in each region, and we'll be advertising them on our website and via social media. So currently there are 2 community input meetings scheduled that I have so far. For Region 7, their meeting is scheduled July 22nd at 10 a.m. via Zoom, and Region 9 Theirs is actually also on July 22nd. Karen is having one session at 2 p.m. and one session at 6 p.m. And I do believe hers will be via Zoom as well. So you can follow up with your LaCan leader and plan to attend your Regents membership meeting so you can provide your input for the 2021 advocacy agenda. Does anybody have any questions?
Looks like Crystal has her hand raised.
Yes, Crystal.
So I was wondering, to try to get the word out about our roundtables and LaCan. I know in our planning committees, we've been talking about some of our initiatives in our contracts will be to like possibly target the youth and to also target a transition into colleges and higher ed. And I'm thinking, could we possibly doing outreach that at the the class or something has to be included to inform everybody about what LaCan is and the roundtables and membership and partners. Is that already happening? I'm not sure if that's already being done with all of our contracts, especially whenever we're with a group of self-advocates for exploitation contracts. And I'm just wondering, since we have their attention, if we can include with those contract holders to inform the self-advocates and reach them right then in case anybody doesn't know what LaCan is and how they can participate in council or partners. Are we already doing that? Does anyone know?
Yes. I mean, we don't do it in every activity, but like with Fountain Family Center contracts, there's a requirement that they present on LaCan and other things as part of their outreach and in-service presentations.
Yeah, I know it's with Families Helping Families, but I'm more talking about, all of our new contracts coming up, all of our ideas, and more towards people who do hands-on training. I think every one of our contractors should be informed about what LaCan is, what the council is, the membership and partners in policy making, and help us inform those people that we're reaching through all of those contracts. If we're not doing it, I would like to make a motion that we add that language to be done by each contract.
So, Crystal, could you word your motion for us? Help clarify it.
Okay, sure. I'd like to make a motion that we recommend that all contracts include language that education and outreach must be provided on LaCan membership, council membership, and partners in policy making membership.
Crystal, does that capture what you're looking for?
Yeah, I think it should be language and what do we say our contracts have? Objectives or something? Or goals? One of the goals or one of the objectives should be Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor by Crystal White for the committee to recommend all contracts include language and objectives that education and outreach must be provided on LACAN, the council, and partners in policymaking membership. Do we have a second?
Rosalind has her
Jill.
hand up.
Rosalind and Jill had their hands up.
Yeah, I was one of them.
Okay, Rosalind, was that a second or did you have a comment?
No,
Rosalind was before me.
yeah. Thank you, Jill. When you say a motion, did anybody had, what was that, Jill?
So Rosalind, we have a motion on the floor by Crystal White for the committee to recommend that all contracts include language and objectives that education outreach must be provided on LACAN, the council, and partners in policymaking membership.
Right.
And we're wondering if you were making a second for
No,
that?
the first. It was the first one, I think it was, before seconding it.
We've finished with the other motion. We're on this motion now.
No, this motion. I can't get my words out with nothing. What was the first, on this one, you had said, before you go with the second motion, you have to have the first motion. That's the one I was going on with the first motion. Does that make sense?
Well, Crystal put the motion forward, so
Right.
when you're thinking about it, she would be the first. So she put her motion out there. She would need a second for that motion.
Oh, okay. That's what I was trying to get to. Oh, was that before, did I go before Jill?
Yes, you were recognized before Jill.
I think that was me, wasn't it? If I'm not correct?
Yes, we're waiting to see if you were seconding this motion.
Yeah, I am.
Okay, thank you, Rosalind.
All right.
Okay, so we have the motion on the floor by Crystal, seconded by Rosalind. Do we have any public comment regarding the motion?
There was one comment by Karonda Corley. I think it was not necessarily in response to this motion, but in the discussion of some of the LACAN member meetings that were happening. And she said that's been happening in the LACAN meetings with Nicole Williams and FHF of Baton Rouge. And so I think Nicole Williams, she is with the Families Helping Family Center in New Orleans. So I guess some discussions have been happening in those meetings is what she was referencing.
Okay, thank you. So do we have any objections? Any abstentions? Okay, motion passes without objection.
Okay, so the last thing I'm going to talk about today is Families Helping Families. I don't know if Brenton is going to go back to the status report, but it's on page 6 if you guys have it pulled up. At the January council meeting, the committee requested that we give you all data from the FHF centers. So we did provide a data table for you all to go off of. I have mine, it looks like this. I don't know if you guys can see it. The FHF centers follow the state fiscal year, which ended on June 30th. So we're still collecting data from the centers for the fourth quarter. And the table that was provided to you all is the third quarter data that we have completed so far. The year-end data I'll provide at the October council meeting when I have all of the centers' fourth quarter data to give you all. One thing to mention on this table, I did speak with Kathy at North Shore Families Helping Families, the director there. They were at 59% for trainings mentioning LACAN. And hold on one second. I did speak to her. We got some numbers corrected, and now her center is at 73%. And that's just for third quarter data. I haven't gotten all the data in for the fourth quarter. But if you all have any questions about the data as so far, just let me know. But this is just third quarter data. And at a glance with the incoming fourth quarter data, the centers have conducted, I'm pretty sure they're gonna meet their grassroots advocacy training and the Act 378 training. I know during this third quarter data, some of the centers were struggling with their outreaches and with their advocacy deliverables, but that was due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I know a lot of them couldn't go out and do outreaches like they would normally in person. So the outreach numbers may not be met, and the advocacy deliverables, some of the centers may have struggled with meeting those due to the COVID pandemic. But I'll have final numbers for you all at the October council meeting. Does anybody have any questions about FHF?
We do have a comment from Liz Gary that says, is this data that is required by the feds that is reported for the fiscal year? Yeah, so we report some of this data both to the legislature and to our federal reporting requirements.
Any other questions for Ebony? All right, we'll move on. Brenton, can you provide us any updates on the abuse and exploitation trainings that went on?
Sure. So for the sake of time, since we're really behind, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail, but if you see on the shared screen, this document here, it was linked in your agenda. For those of you that aren't very familiar with this initiative, the council's been partnering with Team Dynamics for the last couple of years to offer relationships and intimacy classes. So they focus on healthy relationships, intimacy, as well as ways that you can prevent sexual abuse and exploitation for individuals with disabilities, their families, and caregivers. Like I said, this has gone on for the past couple years, and so they've offered, I think it's 20 trainings that have been statewide. You can see in this document here, there were total 150 individuals with disabilities that participated and 347 family members or caregivers. This document, hopefully you were able to review. A lot of it is going to be just kind of flowing numbers from our previous meetings that we've had. I just kind of update some of the information as we get it. It breaks down a lot of the strengths and suggestions that we've received from the classes. Just to let you know, a lot of these suggestions have mostly come from classes that have happened prior to our January meeting. And so a lot of these things that they had suggested on improving the classes, the contractor has implemented, or they are looking at ways that they can implement those things. Also, just to let you know, most of these classes, it gives you a breakdown of all the classes and where they were offered regionally. Our last 3 classes, due to the pandemic, were offered as online webinars rather than in person. So they weren't open to just a specific region. They were opened up statewide. And so these were offered for anyone to participate. And as you can see, there were pretty good participation in these classes as well. I did want to clarify, just in case anyone had any questions on this last one, you'll see a large self-advocate registration and then not no attendance. That was actually a problem with the way that people registered. There was a large group, it's my understanding about 40 people that registered for the afternoon session, which was for individuals with disabilities, and they weren't aware that that was the case. They thought they could opt in to either one. So a lot of the people that registered for that afternoon class actually moved over to the morning class for caregivers. And there were only about 3 or 4 people, I think, that the contractor was aware of that stayed registered in that afternoon class for individuals. I didn't update that data because they weren't exactly sure of those individuals, how many were actually individuals with disabilities, because they just didn't get a response back, is my understanding. So that's why those numbers look a little bit off, but it was just a glitch in the registration system. But that's about it. I mean, are there any questions about this document or any of this information? They have concluded all of their classes for now. And you'll, at the main council meeting on Thursday, you'll discuss if you would want to continue any of these sessions. Looks like Lillian has her hand raised.
Can I go?
Go ahead, Lillian.
Can I ask why there's such a large discrepancy between like the participant type? Like there's only 150 individuals with a disability while there's 347 family members or caregivers. Is it the way we do outreach? Why is there such a big discrepancy between those two populations?
I don't know if it's necessarily outreach. You'll see in some of the registrations here how you have a decent amount of people that will register and then just not show up. I know Team Dynamics, they're always trying to figure out where that discrepancy happens. They're trying to figure out, was it, you know, are people registering and then just as a memo so they can remember about it and there's no plans on participating, or did something come up and they didn't cancel their registration? But in general, the only time that we've had pretty decent turnouts for individuals with disabilities is when they've gone to some of the day habs or some of the group homes to offer the training. They had a good success rate there. That kind of stalled. I think there were supposed to be a few that they were going to go to prior to the during that pandemic time that they couldn't go to. But I don't think we have a solid, or at least not that's been communicated to me, a solid reasoning that we can narrow down as to why not as many have attended. I do think there's probably some outreach issues in there, and that, you know, if people aren't checking their emails or on social media, or if the programs that they're in, you know, we advertise there, but if they don't share that information as well, I think it kind of gets lost there. But I will say this contract year, so the initial year, all of their trainings were just offered. They usually partnered with the FHF Center to host the trainings. But this year they did try to incorporate, you'll see they went to the Magnolia Homes, they went to Ark, Louisiana. I forget where else they were supposed to go, but they've tried to get into some of these other programs to try and bring more self-advocates to these classes. So I think when they've gone to them, it's been a lot more successful if they've been in that program as opposed to having them just kind of register on their own.
And I guess I just have one more question. Thank you for explaining that, by the way. I really appreciate it. With the caregiver classes, are the caregivers given the information that there's also like another class for self-advocates?
I'm not sure. I mean, the classes usually run simultaneously. This year, well, they run on the same day. So I do know a lot of the parents, if you are a parent that is registered, we try to see if you would have your children attend. Also, one of the, I don't know if it's necessarily a barrier, but it's for adults. I mean, I think you have to be 18 or older to participate. So a lot of the parents that attended this may not have children in that age group. So they weren't bringing their children to the session because it was for adults only. So I don't know if that kind of hindered some participation there.
Thanks, Mr. Brenton.
You're welcome.
Do we have any other questions for Brenton? Okay, so next let's move on to Chris Rodriguez. We're going to receive an update on the research Disability Rights Louisiana conducted. As you recall, the council contracted with them to research existing state policy and develop a report with legislative, regulatory, and other recommendations designed to help prevent the sexual and other abuse of people with developmental disabilities. So Chris, can you give us an update on that, please?
Sure, and I apologize that you guys don't have a copy of this. It's been a kind of a frustrating situation for us. We had assigned somebody to write the paper, but unfortunately they went on leave, so I took it over, and for whatever reason, I don't think I saved the final version of the draft and ended up sending a version that was some drafts previously. So I've been frantically rewriting it over the last day and a half, but it's just about finished. And to give you kind of an overview of it, and then I can dig into it some more and take questions. Let me pull it up here. So I know we reserved about 20 minutes for this, so I can probably give you a lot of detail. But the basic layout of the paper, I don't know what you want to call it, a report, a white paper, a paper, whatever suits you. It goes over the purpose of the study or the research paper. It then goes into understanding exactly and defining what abuse and neglect is. It goes into citing some of the literature nationally regarding the prevalence of abuse and neglect among the disability community. It offers some explanations as to why the statistics are so startling with respect to the prevalency of abuse and neglect within the disability community. And then it moves to making recommendations on how to address the staggering prevalence of abuse and neglect within the disability community. And some of those are recommendations related to legislative advocacy, funding, appropriations, and then just supporting programs that could combat instances of abuse and neglect among the disability community. So with that, I'm gonna just kind of dive in here. I'm gonna give you kind of a very quick reading of the paper, kind of an abridged version of it, leaving out certain things that probably aren't necessarily as important. But I guess with that, I'll stop and see if we have any questions before I dig into the paper. Okay. All right. So hearing none, I'll give you a quick rundown of the paper. So this research paper is a collaborative effort by the Louisiana Developmental Disabilities Council and Disability Rights Louisiana to acknowledge, examine, and begin to more aggressively address the prevalence of abuse and neglect within the disability community, particularly the victimization of those with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Through the examination of various characteristics that are presumed to exist within the disability community, characteristics that may contribute to a heightened vulnerability of victimization, the paper aims to provide a number of policy recommendations that we believe will bolster protections for this population, create environments and settings where abuse and neglect is less prevalent, and enhance efforts to educate, empower self-advocates so that they can recognize instances of victimization and feel comfortable advocating on their own behalf. So before examining the prevalence of abuse and neglect within the disability community, it's important to have a firm understanding of what these terms mean and what acts constitute instances of, quote, victimization. For the purposes of this report, we then go on to cite a publication that was produced by the National Association of Councils for Developmental Disabilities, or the DD Council's kind of parent association. The publication uses several definitions provided by the National Adult Protective Services Association to assist in helping individuals understand what abuse and neglect entails. So then the paper goes on to give a relatively brief explanation of what abuse and neglect looks like. And then it cites different categories that different studies related to this topic have divided up crime. So we know that people with disabilities oftentimes are the victims of property and financial crimes, bullying and harassment, neglect, emotional abuse, domestic violence, physical abuse or assault, and sexual assault and abuse. So, that portion of the paper just lays out making sure that everybody has a firm understanding on how to recognize or what might constitute, quote, abuse and neglect. The next part of the paper talks about the prevalence of abuse and neglect within the disability community. And it cites, according to numerous reports and publications spanning decades, individuals with disabilities are far more likely to be the victims of abuse, neglect, and exploitation when compared to their typically able peers. In fact, a 2015 report published by the National Centers on Criminal Justice and Disability cites a study asserting that individuals with disabilities are 4 to 10 times more likely to be victimized than people without disabilities. Furthermore, the report goes on to point out that among individuals with disabilities, those with cognitive disabilities, a category by which many individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities are part of, showed to have the highest rate of victimization when compared to all other categories of disability type. These statistics are especially alarming when combined with the research that suggests that the majority of instances of abuse and neglect involving individuals with developmental disability often go unreported, especially those instances that take place in congregate or institutional type settings. Additionally, research tells us that while situations involving abuse and neglect that take place against typically abled individuals, specifically instances that rise to the standard of, quote, serious crimes, they're typically prosecuted at about 70%, while the same types of injustice inflicted upon individuals with disabilities, by contrast, are only prosecuted at a rate of about 5%. So that's pretty awful. These statistics begin to explain why individuals with disabilities are not only so often subjected to abuse and neglect, but also have a significantly higher rate of repeated victimization. The individual or individuals subjecting them to abuse and neglect are often not brought to justice, and unfortunately tend to be individuals that the victim may depend on for their primary care. Lastly, while the statistics cited speak to non-descriptive instances and types of abuse and neglect taking place within the disability community, it is important to recognize that there does exist an exceptionally high rate of sexual abuse, specifically among individuals with developmental disabilities. One study published by the Spectrum Institute found that more than 90% of individuals with developmental disabilities will experience some form of sexual abuse during their lifetime, which is obviously horrific. The paper then goes on to talk about kind of putting a side note, talking about while the statistics and publications cited in this report are primarily speaking to nationwide rates of abuse and neglect within the disability community, there's no significant reason or evidence to believe that the portrait painted by those statistics do not reflect what is going on in the state of Louisiana. Furthermore, in doing research for the paper, there were a number of Louisiana-based anecdotal examples found to support the cited research. However, the decision was made not to share those stories and to instead focus on kind of national trends and to focus on the recommendations to address the subject at hand. So it was basically a decision because we wanted to kind of create a report that's informative, but short enough to where people actually read it. We didn't want to get into all the examples of abuse and neglect that we might have access to that are Louisiana specific, but wanted to note that there's not really any reason why we don't believe that the national statistics reflect what's going on here in Louisiana. So the paper then goes on to talk about what are possible contributing factors or explanations for the high rates of abuse and neglect within the disability community for a purpose of then trying to figure out how to address them. So there are a number of explanations that researchers have put forth in an attempt to explain why individuals with disabilities are disproportionately subjected to acts of abuse and neglect when compared to their typically able peers. It's important to understand these potential explanations so that we may take them into consideration when developing policy aimed at addressing these issues and to hopefully mitigate any perceived vulnerabilities that may exist with regards to this population. While there are varying explanations regarding the startling high rates of victimizations taking place within the disability community, including explanations that focus specifically on type of disability and specifically on individual acts of abuse and neglect, the following are several areas of overarching consensus. So it goes on, the paper goes on to talk about basically what all the research shows could be the reasons why people with disabilities are often targeted for victimization or abuse and neglect. We talk about there's a perceived vulnerability among the population. So there exists a perception which broadly portrays individuals with disabilities as being inherently vulnerable or weak. This perception may provide potential perpetrators with increased incentives to target individuals with disabilities and to view little risk when taking advantage of them. Research cites a lack of independence as a possible reason. So some individuals with disabilities may require significant supports that are often provided by a family member, caregiver, or support staff. Unfortunately, research shows that these very same individuals are oftentimes the ones inflicting abuse and or neglect upon the individual with a disability. Even in instances where the victim recognizes the abuse, they may not feel comfortable confronting the perpetrator or reporting the circumstance for fear of losing necessary supports or services that the perpetrator actually provides to them. Additionally, in many circumstances, particularly those with intellectual and developmental disabilities, the victim's aggressor may actually be their legal guardian. This introduces an increased dependency on the individual inflicting the abuse or neglect and can abruptly prohibit the individual with a disability from reporting it. So again, a lack of independence may contribute to the victimization of people with developmental disabilities. Additionally, cited as an additional reason could be lack of community engagement and increased isolation. So many individuals with disabilities, particularly those with developmental disabilities, reside in institution or congregate type settings that do not provide them the opportunity to be seen. When individuals with disabilities are not supported and encouraged to participate in community engagement alongside their typically able peers, there inevitably will exist a lack of opportunities for others to recognize and report instances of abuse and neglect. Furthermore, a lack of social interaction and community engagement may very well stunt an individual's ability to understand and recognize what is and what is not an appropriate amount of care, or how they should be treated, or what is appropriate treatment of individuals. This may leave an individual with a disability unable to fully recognize or realize that they are being victimized and or are the subjects of abuse or neglect. Lastly, we cite a lack of education and awareness related to abuse and neglect as one of the contributing factors for the high prevalence of abuse and neglect among the disability community. So the lack of education and awareness related to abuse and neglect refers to both the education of individuals with disabilities and the education of individuals who may be more inclined to have frequent encounters with them, including direct support workers, law enforcement, and the general public, and even the general public within their community, because that's where people with disabilities, we believe, should be living their lives in the community. In terms of individuals with disabilities, many may have never been provided the opportunity to fully understand how to recognize when they're being subjected to abuse and neglect and how to address that circumstance. This may be especially significant when speaking to matters concerning sexual abuse and instances having to do with financial exploitation. A lack of education around abuse and neglect can obviously contribute to increased rates of victimizations and continued victimization. Additionally, it has been reported that individuals who most likely come in contact with individuals with disabilities, including the general public and law enforcement, do not have a very well-developed understanding as to how to recognize signs of abuse and neglect among this population, or how to communicate with them about these situations, particularly those with developmental disabilities. Furthermore, it has been reported that there does exist a perception among some individuals in authority positions and within the criminal justice system that individuals with developmental disabilities are generally unreliable and lack credibility as witnesses. This is evidenced by the unusually low rates of follow-up, post-reporting, prosecution, and conviction of individuals accused of criminal acts when compared to people with disabilities, especially those with developmental disabilities. So the paper lays out, again, as I just mentioned, kind of the contributing factors, or what literature tells us are the contributing factors that contribute to people with disabilities being so much more prevalently the targets of abuse and neglect. So from that point, the paper goes on to beginning to make recommendations on how to combat abuse and neglect based on those presumptions. So while unfortunately there is no one policy that will inevitably eradicate all instances of abuse and neglect within the disability community, there is much to be learned from the previously mentioned contributing factors and possible explanations for why abuse and neglect is so prevalent within this population. If we accept these contributing factors and possible explanations at face value, then we can begin to propose policies aimed at combating them and thus combating opportunities for abuse and neglect and the reoccurrence of instances of abuse and neglect. So to begin moving into the direction of proposing policies to address the presumptive contributing factors, we need to first summarize them and the themes to combat them. So then the paper goes on to, I am recommending the development and support of policies and programs that promote the following. So this goes into the recommendations section, and the recommendations are basically broken down into 4 categories that are meant to address the explanations that were provided earlier in the report. And those are, number 1, supporting programs and policies that promote disability-specific protective supports and monitoring. So the paper goes on to describe what those are. So the disability advocacy community should promote and support the advancement of programs charged with specifically monitoring and protecting individuals with developmental disabilities residing in both institutional and congregate type settings. We want to make sure that this is a strong recommendation because we know that facilities, institutional type settings and congregate type settings are oftentimes far more prone to provide opportunities of abuse and neglect among people with disabilities than community-based environments and circumstances. So we want to make sure that there's monitoring, that there are protective programs out there, and we cite the Community Living and Ombudsman program as being one of those that should be supported by this paper and should be increased. So it goes into talking about this ombudsman program that protects and monitors the over 4,000 or 3,500 people with developmental disabilities residing in congregate and institutional type settings. It says that it's a good program, but unfortunately, despite very gracious funding from the state and the federal government, there are approximately about 1 ombudsman to every about 350 individuals with developmental disabilities residing in the state's privately run group homes, and how, if we're really serious about combating abuse and neglect, and we're understanding that abuse and neglect is far more prevalent in institutional type settings than in the community, then we would want to beef up programs like the Community Living Ombudsman program in order to make sure that those individuals are in fact not being subjected to abuse and neglect, provided that they are in an isolated environment when compared to people with disabilities living in the community. So that's the first recommendation. The second recommendations are under the umbrella of increasing home and community-based support services and engagement. So this really leans on trying to address the literature that shows that, again, people with developmental disabilities are far more likely to be subjected to abuse and neglect when residing in congregate type settings, as opposed to being in the community. If people are in the community, if people with developmental disabilities are residing in the community, then they are far less likely to encounter abuse and neglect. And if they do encounter abuse and neglect, it's far more likely that it will be reported. So this section goes on to basically continue the argument that I think is being argued quite well in the state of Louisiana, that if you want to be serious about abuse and neglect, addressing abuse and neglect among individuals with developmental disabilities, then you have to be in support of HCBS services and supports and waivers. So increasing people's opportunities to access HCBS waivers will ultimately combat abuse and neglect, is the point of that recommendation. And I think it just goes on to bolster, I think, the things that are already occurring in the state related to everybody, I think, support of HCBS services. I think it might be important to address or support HCBS services under the umbrella of combating abuse and neglect, especially provided that we don't know what's going to happen in the future with respect to budget cuts and the unfortunate circumstances that we're in with COVID and the economy and things like that. So I think it's an important thing to have in this report. The third recommendation is around education, awareness, and training. So this goes to try and combat the earlier suggestion that one of the contributing factors is a lack of education and awareness related to abuse and neglect. I think everybody would agree that that's a contributing factor. So this goes on to make recommendations about funding programs that educate both people with intellectual and developmental disabilities about how to recognize abuse and neglect when they're being victimized and how to appropriately address it and report it and feel confident in that. So that includes education, awareness, and training of people with developmental disabilities, and also education, awareness, and training to people that might come in contact with people with developmental disabilities, which is really anybody and everybody, about how to recognize signs that an individual with developmental disabilities might be being subjected to abuse, neglect, or exploitation. And this includes law enforcement. This includes people in the criminal justice system, helping them better understand how to communicate with people with developmental disabilities, helping them better understand that these individuals, despite their disability, are credible witnesses. And when they express the feeling that they may be being victimized, that it should be taken just as seriously as anybody else, and that it needs to be taken seriously. And we need to start combating the extremely low and unusual instances of prosecution when these things are being taken to when law enforcement in the criminal justice system is being made aware of these circumstances, which obviously, as we cited earlier in the paper, is not the circumstance. Only 5% of individuals are often prosecuted for this type of stuff, as compared to 70% if the victimization was a person without a disability. And then lastly, we talk about recommendations related to empowerment, independence, and self-advocacy, with the understanding that the more independent an individual is, the more likely they will be able to recognize, again, victimization and understand and have the empowering knowledge to bring it to somebody's attention and to address it. This goes into, some of the recommendations in here are even go into supported decision-making, because a person who has more independence will likely be less inclined to be in a position to be victimized and to be able to speak up on their own behalf, and start to combat this perception that disability is equal to vulnerability and weakness, which are some of the things that we pointed out earlier in the paper are reasons why individuals who may perpetrate these types of situations believe that they can do that, target people with disabilities and get away with it. So it goes into recommendations around empowerment, increasing independence of people with developmental disabilities, and strengthening self-advocacy as ways to combat instances and the prevalence of abuse and neglect in Louisiana. And then it goes into the conclusion, which the paper lays out this very dire and startling view of abuse and neglect upon people with disabilities, specifically people with developmental disabilities. But the conclusion cites that all the recommendations that we're making are things that are actually taking place here in the state of Louisiana. We just need to do more of them. We need to be more aggressive about them. And we need to continue them and make sure that we never move backwards. So again, when we look at the recommendations, the supports and monitoring, we have a CLOP program we have an ombudsman program in Louisiana. We just need to make sure that we're supporting it and perhaps advancing it and developing it more. We do a really good job, I think, in terms of home and community-based services and supports, getting people on waivers. We just need to make sure in our recommendations that we continue to do that and don't let anything get in the way of that and continue to move in that direction. There's some incredibly good education awareness and trainings that we've talked about in this committee today about sexual abuse and about education of law enforcement and things like that. They're being done. We just need to make sure that we do them more aggressively, more statewide, and make sure that they don't get cut. And again, to the conversations that we've had just today, we have programs that talk to empowerment, independence, and self-advocacy. We just need to make sure that we continue to do those, again, supporting those programs, being more aggressive about those programs, exercising new opportunities to increase independence, not the least of which is the new supported decision legislation and things like that. So the conclusion is, things are really bad, but that Louisiana is already engaging in lots of activities that would begin to combat abuse and neglect. We just need to bolster those, continue to educate our legislators about the importance of those programs so that they can garner even more support and strength. And hopefully by doing that, we will see instances of abuse and neglect among this population go down. So with that, and again, I will say all that while saying, and this is a discussion I had with Sean, this paper is your paper. We just happen to have written it. If you want us to redo it, that's perfectly fine with me. We're going to write this paper in such a way and continue to write it until you feel comfortable that it's articulating the goals that you want it to focus on. And we're going to try and do the best we can to provide you with that product. So no hard feelings if you're like, that was not where we were going with this paper. That's perfectly fine. We can always rewrite it. We're open to input. I think the goal was really to have this done and maybe even write, obviously, like with many reports, sometimes it just sits on a shelf. We wanted to keep it short enough to where we felt people would actually read it. So it's about 7 pages, 6 or 7 pages of text. If we decide to put it in kind of a glossy format, we put some pictures and things that probably end up around 10 pages. But we would also predict that we would summarize it in a 1-pager and that it would be formalized, done, and people would have a familiarity with it by the time that the next legislative session would embark, so that we can use it as an example to say, hey, if you're serious, say several things. Number one, abuse and neglect is wildly prevalent among the disability community, and that's awful. Number two, if you want to address this, these are the ways that we need to do it. These are the things that need to be funded. These are the programs that need to be supported by the state of Louisiana and the legislature. So I say that to say we have time to redo it if you would like, or to make adjustments and edits and things like that. And you will get this report in the next couple of days so that you can read it yourself.
Thank you, Chris. Look forward to your finalized report. If anyone has any questions for Chris, I'd just like you to encourage you to keep them brief. We only have a few minutes. We're running behind and kind of need to move on with the agenda. So with that, anybody have any questions for Chris?
Crystal has her hand up.
Yes, Crystal.
Hey, Chris. Here is, so I listened to your paper and
Oh, can't hear you.
You're on mute, Crystal.
Yeah, you got to unmute yourself.
Hey, can you hear me now, Chris?
Yes.
Okay, so I've spoken to legislators about some issues like this before, and they told me, hey, Crystal, when you come in with a lot of information, on the first page, it needs to be like a quick rundown, like an overview, and they like visuals. So if there's any stats that you have, put it on the first page is my recommendation, so you can quickly get them to read the rest of it, because it's very hard to have people even read 1 page of information. And I think this is extremely, extremely valuable information and important, and we need people to have the buy-in and the understanding. So my encouragement would be quick 1-pager on the front with visuals to capture attention, and then make them read to the 7 pages. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Thank you.
Yeah, Crystal, I couldn't agree more. My previous life, I was a lobbyist for years and years on behalf of people with developmental disabilities, people with disabilities in general. I think once we get the paper where you guys feel comfortable with it, we would then create a 1-pager exactly with what you're talking about, graphics, statistics, and recommendations. Very easy to read, you know, that gets people's attention, gets legislators' attention without, you know, spending a lot of their time, hopefully provoking enough interest so that they actually read the 5 to 6 pages. But I couldn't agree with you more. And Sean and I had talked about us not only writing the paper, but creating supplemental materials that can be used as well. So I think that's a great recommendation.
Jill has her hand up as well.
Yes, Jill. Jill, we can't hear you.
Chris, when did you say that this report was gonna get out to council members?
So like I said, yeah, we wrote it and then I don't know what happened. I either didn't save it correctly or whatever. So I've been rewriting it the last day and a half. I should have like 2 pages to go. You should get it by no later than Monday.
Okay, and can I ask 2 questions at once?
Go for it.
You said the report, like, you said the reporting incidence was like 10 to 3 or something. Like, why is that? And like, why aren't people like, okay, I'm about to get on the soapbox. Like, why aren't people like, if I got assaulted and you got assaulted, why in a cop's eyes or whatever's eyes, why are you more relevant?
Right.
Like,
that is a great question. I think there's a misunderstanding, and we talk about it in the paper a little bit. And, you know, as an organization who oftentimes encounters or represents people who have been abused or neglected, one of the challenges we have is the perception that people with developmental disabilities are not credible, that they don't know what they're talking about, that they're not good on the stand, that when they recount something, it may not be accurate as a result of their developmental disabilities, which we believe is largely, in many circumstances, just nonsense. It's a perpetuation of this ideology that people with developmental disabilities are incapable of expressing themselves, when in fact, typically, it's more of a reflection of the individuals who are trying to gain the information. So that's why we make the recommendation of educating people in the criminal justice system to better understand how to communicate with people with developmental disabilities instead of just writing them off because they don't know how to speak to them.
oh,
And that goes towards, and again, going back to just the great work that the DD Council does. I know that the DD Council already supports trainings of law enforcement and things like that. And I think that's a great first step. We need to take that and expand it across the entire criminal justice system to educate attorneys and educate judges and other people of authority about how to communicate with people with disabilities, particularly those with developmental disabilities, and help them understand that just because you have a developmental disability doesn't automatically make you any less credible than anybody else.
because since you mentioned this paper, like probably close to a year ago, and Miss and Liz can actually vouch because before when we went to the conference in New Orleans last July, like I, for no like apparent reason, like this topic is just so like I'm just passionate about this particular project. So again, like I've told you many times, and you're probably sick of me hearing me say this, but if there's anything I can do, I'm definitely want in.
I appreciate that. Yeah. And, you know, there's multiple purposes for the paper. Obviously, we wanted to write it in a way that we could educate policymakers, but I think it can be seen through a lens to help facilitate a conversation about the programs that the DD Council supports and how the DD Council spends its funding. Again, many of the things and recommendations in the paper, the DD Council is already involved in. So this might help bolster some of those goals.
Thank you, Jill. I hate to cut you short, but we need to just move along. Brenton, do we have any other comments or do we have any other questions?
Yes, there is one chat comment from Carmen Setnar. It says, I'm a sexual assault nurse examiner who performs exams on sexual assault victims. I recently did a presentation on this exact information to all the sexual assault nurse examiner nurses in her program. Great information. I hope this paper gets circulated well for more awareness.
Right. Very important work.
Thank you, Carmen. Okay, for brevity's sake, I'd like to move along on the agenda. And next would be the non-contractual updates. And Brenton, would you like to go ahead and start us off on that?
Yeah, one of the things we wanted to give an update on quickly was just, it was a couple years ago. You can see the letter here on the screen. It was linked in your agenda. The Act 378 subcommittee had started up a committee to look at the individual and family support and consumer care resource program policies. We made these recommendations, which are linked here to the department, which they did accept. And so every meeting we've kind of been given updates on where they stand. So I just want to let you know that in March, the final rule was published in the Louisiana Register. And so I believe they're currently rewriting the manual, but so all of these, the new rule is out. These recommendations have been accepted. So that's great news. And I just want to give you a quick update on that. Are there any questions about this?
Just real quickly, Brenton, this is Julie. Just the manual draft has been completed and is in circulation at this point.
Oh, perfect. I think Liz Gary also has her hand raised.
Hey, Liz.
Hey, Mike. Julie, I think you just answered that. I got a copy of it from Sean because I was one of the members on the original ad hoc. And so he was requesting any updates or anything or reviews. So this is basically just from back when we met. This is just saying that we're now putting it into place and there's not, because from what I could tell, it was mostly just updating. It looked like they were also updating some forms to be more conformed to everything. Am I correct with that?
Yes, that's accurate. It was to reflect all of you guys' work and we just wanted to circulate it to those work group members because it has been a while. So there may be some other things at this point we need to look at, but we were just trying to memorialize all the work done with that work group and get it put in the manual. And as he said, the rules already out there. So yes, that's the goal.
Okay. So with all fairness, I was not sure if that's what it was. But Yes, I do have some thoughts and changes since then, but being that it's taken 2 years to get it, I'm just going to leave that alone right now. Maybe we can revisit in about a year to see how it plays out first with the changes that are going to be implemented before I make any more suggestions. Thanks, Julie.
And we
Thanks,
may wanna
Mike.
Yeah, we may want to regroup on that because my staff too had some other suggestions as we started looking at it. Mhm.
Awesome. Thank you. If somebody can possibly consider making an ad hoc then for an IFS, that would be awesome. Thank you.
Well, I will say there was one that was created in the Act 378 subcommittee. And so it would be, I mean, that committee, this update will be provided to that committee later next week, and they can determine if they want to reconvene that committee. But there was a comment also that I wanted to share from Carmen Setnor. She asked if these recommendations would be for OCDD and the behavioral health side. I think that's it. Sorry, my chat is, I think that was everything.
Yeah, and this is Julie. I'm not sure. I'll have to follow up. I thought that they were combining them, but I'm hesitant to say that because I'm not completely positive. But I can follow up, and by the time we have council meeting next week, I'll make sure to have that answer.
Yeah, because I do know behavioral health was at the table in the work group to be able to chime in, and we looked over their manual as well.
Yes, we tried. I'm sorry, Brenton, this is Liz again. Yes, we tried to match the two of them together on both sides. So we did go through the IFS manual as well as the CCR. I think it's called the CCR manual. And Brenton, I'm sorry, can you clarify one more time? You said there was an ad hoc suggestion already. What did you say? I'm sorry, about a committee?
No, so that committee was formed via the Act 378 subcommittee.
Uh-huh.
So next week when this update is given, I mean, I would think it would be that committee that could determine if this work group needs to meet again.
So they could reconvene the same committee? Is that what you're saying, with the same committee members, just to look further into it? Is that what you're saying, or they'd have to make a new one?
I'd have to look and see who was on that committee. I mean, I don't know. We may have had some council members turn over by that time. They may be able to just reestablish that committee. I'm not certain. I don't know if Sean's on here. Maybe he knows the answer to that. If there need to be new appointments, or if it would just be that same committee.
Selection of committees is at the discretion of the chair.
There you go.
So, I mean, I'm sure Randall would consider, I can't speak for him, but like, you know, the people who were on it before, they have historical knowledge, but then there are other people that may want to be considered, and he, you know, but it's at his discretion per the bylaws.
Thank you.
You also have hands raised from Crystal White and Jill Hano.
Yes, Crystal.
Sorry, I need to put my hand down because my question was for Brenton to go over that process again that Liz just asked about how it goes back to 378 and what committee. Got it now. Thanks.
Yeah. So who was next, Jill? Jill, you had your hand up?
Hey, sorry. So this Mark Thomas letter that I'm looking at, that's the packet that our committee gets every quarter. I always assumed it was the same information every quarter, but is the information up in this Mark Thomas packet? Is the information updated every quarter?
No, so this letter is the letter that was originally sent in October to Mark Thomas. And we had a request, we would give updates every meeting. And so we had a request that in our meeting packets, as long as we were given updates, to continue to put what our recommendations were so people could have a refresher when they were reviewing. So this information has not been updated. This letter is the same one, and the recommendations are the same one that you've seen every meeting for the last year or so that we've been including it in there. But every time that we have an update as far as if the rule has been published in the register or something like that, we link that in our status reports, which is on our council meeting page under our council meetings on the website. And so if you go to the link through there, then you can actually read the rule if you would like to. But this actual letter that gets included in your agenda has not updated. That's just the original recommendations from the group.
Okay, I understand. That's what I thought. Thank you.
You're welcome. Now I see Liz has her hand up. I don't know if that's from earlier or if it's her hand is up again.
Yes, Liz.
Oh, it just went down.
Nope,
So-
that was a mistake. Sorry.
Okay, no problem.
All right, we have any other comments or are we ready to move along? Okay. So let's move on to community and family support system.
Yeah, so there, we had listed the budget because I know there had been questions about the budget. I didn't know if Jen with Medicaid or Julie with OCDD, if they had anything they could share as far as the budgets go. I know there was going to be some discussion with administration over this week. I don't know if there's any updates that they could share, but I just wanted to give them that time if there was something they wanted to share about the budget, if there's going to be any impact to services or anything before we move on to the next issue.
Yeah. Hi, Brenton. This is Jen. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Great. So I was able to get some further information since we last spoke. For those who were not following the budget bill through the process, there were several cuts to the Medicaid program on both the administrative and on the payment side. However, through both the regular and special session as they finalize the budget. However, the good news is that those cuts at this time will not impact any of the home and community-based services directly. They're basically, what we've been able to do is, because of COVID, we had some initial enrollment projections that were impacted by the pandemic. So we were able to moderate the budget down from the initial enrollment projections that we had based on that impact. And so it's not going to be a cut to services as a result of that adjustment that we were able to make on our anticipated enrollment. There were also some small adjustments that we were able to make in our managed care rates. So again, not an impact directly to services being cut or anything like that. So that's basically the 411 on where the budget landed at the end of the special session for Medicaid at a very high level. And I can answer if you have any specific questions. But I also want to just caution everyone that the governor did issue a gubernatorial veto that reduced our cut. It was about, originally, the way the bill was passed, it was a $50 million state general fund cut to the Medicaid program on the payments side. That's not including administrative expenditures. So that $50 million cut translated to about $167 million total. Total means of financing when you include the federal dollars that we get with those state funds. So that was reduced with the governor's veto. He reduced the cut to Medicaid that was introduced at the last version of the bill by $15 million. So they have gone ahead and we are at I think it's $35 million state general fund cut still. That's where it landed. So that translates to, I don't have the exact dollar that the 35 translates to because the governor's veto just came through yesterday. So I don't have that update. I apologize. But that's the final Medicaid cut as of today on the services side. So where we're going for the fall that I need to just kind of lay the groundwork for is in the governor's veto. He also indicated that all state agencies, all executive state agencies should plan for a deficit avoidance plan because of the impact COVID is having on our revenues in the state. And we're not sure how the revenue estimating conference will come back with projections for the state budget. And what the revenue estimating conference does is basically tell the state legislators and the executive branch department and all the state agencies how much income the state might receive based on many different factors, but they are tracking the impact of COVID especially closely. And so that is having a very real impact on our revenue due to reduced tax income and many other business factors. So that's why the governor is planning ahead, and he's saying that all state agencies should prepare a deficit reduction plan, and a deficit avoidance plan, excuse me. And to do that, he's saying that we should look to, let me make sure I say this correctly. We should look to what might be a 10% state general fund reduction as preparation. Now, that is not to say we will have a 10% state general fund reduction. This is planning ahead so that no one is surprised and we're prepared for what may occur depending on what the projections come back as in the fall. So in the Department of Health, a 10% state general fund amount translates to around, so this is rounding, around $200 million state general fund. So I just want you to understand how large that impact could be on the department. 200 million state general fund is in many cases matched with federal dollars. And so that could translate up to quite a significant cut to the department. And we don't know how that will look. We don't know what that will mean. We don't have a plan yet. The governor's veto came yesterday, but we're working with the Division of Administration on guidance, and we're working on whether we will actually have the 10% cut or not. Right now, it's just putting together a plan in case it comes that our revenues are down. So I just wanted to put that on everyone's radar. If you see things coming up in the news, or if you see things coming up in the council around budget, that is what the entire state is planning for, not just LDH. That is the directive for the governor, that all state agencies plan and get ready for a potential 10% state general fund reduction. So as we develop that and as we learn more, we will make sure that that's communicated. But right now, we just got the directive yesterday, so nothing planned yet.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer.
Crystal has her hand raised.
Yes, Crystal.
Hey, Mike, like Jen said, this is going to be constantly being updated. And I was wondering if we could just open the line of communication between like Jen and yourself as the chair of this committee to let us know and inform, maybe then you could inform this committee about any potential cuts that we're looking at. I think this is something we have to stay in front of and also be aware of, and let the population know that we serve and keep them informed. So I'm just wondering if maybe we can keep that pipeline of communication about this budget issue, because there could be a potential crisis.
Okay, sure.
Jen, is that possible that as you get updates, you can notify Mike?
Absolutely. You know, Julie and I will both be involved in that process as state agencies under LDH. So we'll make sure that, you know, we report back to the council as plans are finalized.
And even if, you know, not as they're finalized, because we need to be proactive about our budget. So as you get information, it needs to be shared with us, because we can't wait till after a decision is made that would affect our population.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well,
I would like for you to, you know, inform Mike of everything going on with this particular issue about the 10%.
absolutely. To clarify, when I say finalized, anytime that we're developing cut scenarios and situations like that, the legislature is planning to go back for another special session in the fall. We're told around October, specifically to handle this issue and also legislative issues that might have been missed due to the shortened duration of the regular session. But in particular, they're looking at the revenue. So I want to clarify that when I say finalized, I don't mean after it's done. I mean proposals that have to go before the legislature for consideration. When we have the proposal finalized, I'll make sure that we share that, because that would be when you advocate, right, with the legislature.
Thank you, Jennifer. Any other questions for Jennifer?
Yeah, it's Roslyn. Jennifer, is this budget that's going to be like for this year only or for next year as well?
Yes, Rosalind, that's a very good question. So what I'm talking about, you're correct. It's for this year. So it starts July 1. It started July 1 and it'll go through June 30th of next year, 2021. So that's the year that I'm talking about, is July through June.
Thank you on that, because I didn't know if they're going to have like an ending date. Do they have it like from the start date to where it was going to end at?
Absolutely.
On that
and we have kind of
budget range.
Yeah, absolutely. We have kind of a weird year, so it's a good question.
Thanks.
Jill has her hand up as well.
Hi, Jill.
Yes, Jill.
Jill, unmute yourself, Jill.
Okay, there. Sorry, it takes a minute. Did you say, Jen, that these budget cuts did not affect waivers, or you said something good?
Yes, I did. So far, the budget cuts have not impacted waiver services.
Okay.
What we have to look ahead to is in October, we have to revisit the budget, and depending on what we're seeing, the impact of COVID on the state finances will determine if services are impacted then.
And do you have any budget information in your quarterly report for Thursday?
No, Jill, I'm so sorry. When I submitted the quarterly report, it was before the budget information was available.
Okay, cool.
But I can give an update there if you would like me to.
Hi, Jen. What months did you say it was?
Sure, it's July of 2020 through June of 2021. So 12 months.
So where was it ending month?
June of 2020.
No, you said Oh, June
June.
or July? I mean, June, okay.
It starts in July of 2020 and it goes all the way through to June of 2021.
Oh,
So a full
okay.
year, a full 12 months from this month.
June 31st, correct?
June 30th, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
thanks, Sean.
31st.
Thanks, Steve.
Okay, if we don't have any other questions, let's move on to emergent issues.
Oh, looks like Crystal has her hand up.
No. So sorry. So sorry.
Down. Okay, no problem. Oh, wait, I think I missed someone. Looks like Liz has her hand up as well.
Yes, Liz?
Just, thank you, Mike. I just had a quick question. I know she expressed everything to do with the Medicaid budget, but I don't know if Julie was going to address anything with OCDD and if there was any issues there. And I understand that on a SAC call yesterday or the day before, they talked about possibly the human resource. I'm sorry, not the human resource, the regional. Oh my goodness,
I gotcha.
You know what I'm. Thank you.
Yeah, and I saw on social media, it looks like folks maybe misunderstood what I said on the
Thank
SAC.
you. If you can clarify, that would be awesome.
Yeah, so basically, and this is in regards to the to our Act 378 programs, the IFS and the FFF programs. And back in the 2017 regular session, Act 73 required that all of the local governing entities have an amount equal to 9% of its state general fund appropriation for those programs. And so we did send out, there were some questions. We did send out clarification to all of the LGEs and basically just letting them know that during this budget session, there was some of our state general fund dollars were replaced by CARES Act funds for our LGEs. So there was clarification that went out that just said that the 9% requirement applied to both state general fund and CARES Act dollars. My comment on the state advisory council meeting yesterday and what my intent was to share is that when you look at what the state general fund dollars are for the LGEs, the requirement there is that they spend 9%. And so the issue that may have some having to look at some reductions is that their total state general fund allocation from last year to this year was reduced in many cases. And so therefore, the 9% requirement might be less funding from last year to this year because their total, so that 9% total would be reduced if their state general fund dollars were reduced. And so they all, you know, all of us are really struggling right now as it relates to budget because there were lots of changes all the way up to June the 30th and now some additional changes with the governor's veto. So at this point in time, I just was trying to, one, let people know that the 9% is still in place, regardless of if it's state general fund or CARES Act, but two, just kind of a warning that that requirement will be less for, I believe, all of them this year compared to last year, because I believe all of them did have some reduction in their state general fund dollars, even with the CARES Act funding. Is that clear?
Yes, Julie, it is. So I have one more question on FFF, on Flexible Family Fund, but I just want to say, Brenton, I don't know who usually tracks that form and gets the information as far as the state general funds and the percentage that is used for Act 378, but I'm hoping that we will continue to have a close eye on that to make sure that they are merging the two together. I had addressed this with Julie and Mark quite some time back when I had heard the buzz out there that they they were going to possibly try to just use the state general funds. But I want to make sure that even if there is a reduction, that it's not the reduction because of the CARES Act, just the reduction that they have from state general funds to this year from last year. And the only other thing, Julie, is the FFF. I understand that Jefferson Parish, some people supposedly got phone calls that their FFF wasn't being renewed. Is that in direct relation to this? Is that not true that those calls made, or is that just a buzz that's people are saying and it's not really happening?
I spoke with Lisa Roden and Nicole Green one day this week because my days all start to mix together. And they advised me that there was some misinformation out there that they were working to clear up with the families, that there was a bit of a delay, but that they are working to get all of those contracts back in place. I believe they've set up some tents or locations for people to be able to sign the contracts, so that they can get all that resolved by the end of the month. So.
Okay, so I know that for a fact because I know Florida Parishes was having trouble getting their stuff signed, but I also know that they were doing it through email as opposed to having to make those people actually sign. Is there anything in law that says that those people actually have to go to a tent area to sign those documents, Julie?
Not to my knowledge, and I shared with Jefferson Parish that we could look at an exemption there. I think that and some of that can be left to them. They felt strongly that because it was a contractual agreement that they needed the signature. They did share with me that they were sending staff to people's homes to get the signature if families were not able to make their way to Jefferson Parish to sign. So they were looking at accommodations they could make, but they felt strongly for their accounting purposes that they needed to have the physical signature.
Thank you, Julie.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like Crystal and Matt both have their hands up.
Crystal?
Hey, Julie, this is Crystal. So I know we don't quite know what the reduction would be towards IFS dollars to each one of the regions. But as you can imagine, hearing any type of reduction in those funds gives me quite angst hearing about, because I know for our region in Region 2, and I know Mike's aware of this, how important those dollars are and where they go to. It's rent, and I'm concerned that housing is going to be affected for some people if there's a significant reduction. So my ask is, if there is a reduction and it happens before we meet, can we be updated on those numbers beforehand?
So I guess let me be clear. There's not, when the LGEs, the state general fund dollars that the LGEs get, to my knowledge, they're not done in what we call a line item way, where we say, this is the funding you get for FFF. This is the funding you get for IFS. They have a state general fund allotment, and then each of the LGEs with their board of directors identifies what those state general fund dollars will be used for, versus some of them have grant money, some of them have millage, all different ways they have money coming in. And so that it really is left to them to determine what that allocation would be. And again, we do have a requirement that they meet the 9%. And in reference to something Liz said too, what we can do, we won't have it ready for next week with all the uncertainty with the budget, but what we can do, and what Monique Cross with the department's fiscal office typically does, is she will take and provide to us in OCDD what the full allocation of the state general fund dollars is. So in this case, it'll be the full allocation of state general fund and CARES Act dollars are, so that we can include that in the report that we have for our Act 378 subcommittee to show this is what their allocation is, and this is what the 9% expectation is, and this is what they have budgeted. So if we need to get that updated before our next quarterly meeting, then we can ask for that so that we can share that with you guys. And I'm assuming the Act 378 committee would want that as well.
Sure, that would be wonderful. And like I'm saying, it's only because we're meeting now, we're hearing about this, and maybe October it'll be too late for us to really understand. what has happened. So I appreciate that. Thank you, Julie.
Okay.
I'm sorry, who else had a comment?
It was Matt, and Stephen also has his hand up.
Go ahead, Matt.
Hey, thanks, Michael. I appreciate it. Julie and Jennifer, just to paraphrase what I heard, essentially there was a $50 million state general fund cut to LDH, but then the governor issued a veto of approximately $15 million. So therefore you guys did take a $35 million state general fund cut. Did I get that right?
Yes, but that was specific to Medicaid.
Okay.
Not the whole department. I believe they had other cuts that I did not address. And the $35 million cut to Medicaid was specifically on the payments or services side, not the admin. We had additional, I think, $13 to $14 million state general fund cut on admin, but I don't have that exact number with me.
Got it. And then the 9%, I got a little confused. That's just an overall reduction of 9% of state general fund throughout the department. But I guess if I heard you correctly, this is not going to affect home and community-based services.
Right. So Julie, I don't know what you were talking about for the 9%.
Yeah, the 9%, Matt, had to do with the solely to the Family Flexible Fund and the individual and family support programs. And there is a requirement that all of the LGEs, that 9% of their total state general fund dollars be appropriated to those two programs.
Got it.
That was done back in 2017.
Either, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And then my other comment is more just a general comment on the state of home and community-based services. We just had a board meeting with the Community Provider Association on Wednesday. And, of course, this is what I'm feeling too. I'm a provider agency, but it was shared throughout our 42 members. COVID-19, this re-emergent of CV-19 of late is really impacting providers more than initially in March. We're seeing more of our clients test positive, more of our direct service workers. Of course, if you have a worker test positive and he or she was with a client, that has a domino effect too. But we're having a very difficult time retaining our workforce because of CV-19. Maybe they just don't want to go into the home because of the dangers that may present, or they themselves or their family, et cetera, et cetera. And then it's also hyperinflated because of the robust unemployment that is currently in effect until July 25th, I think is the date where they get additional unemployment. We've seen such unbelievable amounts of unemployment claims throughout our personal company, and it's really impacting our services. So my last comment would be, and I know you guys are in a tremendous budget crunch, as you just mentioned, but if the $2 hazard pay that was approved by CMS, if you guys could find something in the couch, as they say, or underneath the couch pillows, and can implement that specific provision for for providing hazard pay for those who have potential COVID or do have COVID, for caring for them, it would really mean a lot to providers, particularly us too, because when someone tests positive, it's really a challenge to find workers in that home. So I know y'all under a lot of constraints. It sounds like the budget really has just gotten clearer now as far as the amount of revenue available. But I wanted to share what we're experiencing on the ground. And you probably already know this, but I just wanted to reiterate it. So thank you so much.
And just a quick note on that, we are working now with Financial Review Committee and Medicaid to try to move that forward. So hopefully within the next couple of weeks, we should have some additional guidance on that hazard pay.
Well, I appreciate it, Julie. I thought we were out of the woods maybe a month ago, and this resurgent, Lake Charles, Lafayette in particular, but even in our Pineville office, it's really hitting a lot closer to home than that first round. So I appreciate it so much.
Looks like we have a comment from Liz Gary. Julie, does that $2 per hour increase for hazard pay apply to self-direction workers also? Oh, looks like she.
Sorry, I was just saying, I think so, but I'm going to verify that with my staff.
Yeah. And so Stephen and Jill have their hands up. Also, just a reminder, the meeting was supposed to end at 2:00. We still have a topic on the agenda we haven't gotten to.
Yes. So Stephen, can you make it brief, please?
I'll try. Miss Julie, this is, can we go back regarding the FFF?
Sure.
We were talking about the misinformation in the Jefferson Parish area. Can you kind of briefly go over that again and where we stand as of now?
Sure. So I started getting some phone calls last weekend, and there was
I heard the same thing, so that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, there was a concern. I think that some families were notified that the Family Flexible Fund was going to be ending, and so there was some outreach with Jefferson Parish. And again, Lisa Roden, who is the executive director of Jefferson Parish Human Services Authority, and Nicole Green, who is the developmental disabilities director. I had a phone call with them. I believe it was Tuesday. And what they told me is they knew that there was a lot of misinformation out there. There were families who indicated that they were contacted, but so some of the misinformation may have came out of their office. So they were working to clear it up. But what they indicated to me is that the intent was to get the contracts back for Flexible Family Fund for all of the families who continue to qualify, who still had it previously, or who had it last year, that they were working expeditiously to be able to get signatures on all those contracts so that families wouldn't miss a month of the stipend or the payment that they get. And that their goal was to have all of that done and all of the contracts signed. I believe they told me, they gave me a date, the 20 something, so that it could be processed, and then make sure all the payments, that no one lost a July payment. So they should, if anybody did outreach to you, Stephen, over the weekend, you may want to reach back out to them, because it should be resolved and all of the families should have been contacted at this point.
Thank you.
Jill was the other hand up.
Jill?
Jen, now my notes are conflicting. What did you say the SGF budget decrease, the number for the state general funds decrease was?
I'm going to have to get that for you guys, Jill. And that's what I shared with Crystal. What we can do is hopefully within the next month, we'll have all of the kind of the budget stuff finalized. And what I can do is make sure that we have an accounting for, by region last year, what was their total SGF funding and the 9% requirement. And then for this upcoming fiscal year, an identification of what is the current state general fund and CARES Act funding by LGE and what that 9% is, so that you guys can see what the total is and what the difference may be from last year to this year for each of the LGEs.
I'm sorry, I meant to ask, was the total decrease for funds for Medicaid 200 or 35 mil because I have both written down.
Yeah, Jill. Hey, this is Jen. I'm sorry about that. So the total funds that we have currently cut, state general fund, is 35 million on our services side. What we're looking to the future, and it has not happened yet, and it might not happen, is planning for a potential 10% cut, which equates to about 200 million. But it has not happened. It's just to get ready a plan in case the state revenues do not come up.
Okay, my notes were confusing.
I think I was confusing. Sorry about that.
And this is what I want to know because I'm on SSI and Social Security. Now, would my 2 checks would be cut as well?
Not to my knowledge, Rosalind. Those checks are not part of Medicaid. They're part of, like you said, supplemental security or Social Security. So that would not be impacted by the numbers that I just gave.
Oh, cool. Because I was thinking about it, I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to get cut.
No, it's a different program. So that's on the federal side. The numbers I gave are just state. So you should be good.
All right. I just wanted to know if it was going to be, underneath those 2. But I was trying to understand you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because I need them too badly.
And Michael, I apologize, but I had a hard stop at 2, so I'm going to have to hop off.
Yes, ma'am. I understand.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah, so we had the discussion of exemptions that we were going to talk about, but Julie, I don't know if we're way over. I don't know if you still have time to be with us for this conversation or.
I actually had a 2 o'clock as well, but I can try to give like a very high level overview. I was hopeful that we would be able to have a more in-depth conversation today as well about the exemptions. But we sort of had a plan and a path moving forward. And then when we didn't move to phase 3, and then now that cases are spiking again, it's caused us to really kind of take a step back and rethink some of our planning anyway. But I can share, and so if there are folks who would like to engage in a work group that we're looking at putting together, what we are working to do, my team has put together sort of a crosswalk document. So for all of these exemptions that you have here, there's different ways that you ask CMS for those exemptions. One way is through what's called an Appendix K. And an Appendix K basically is a document when you have a federal declaration. It's a document where you tell CMS, these are the rules in our waiver, but we're asking to change these rules during a certain period in response to the waiver. So we have approval for many things through our Appendix K that are approved right now. CMS has given us approval through mid-January. There is some discussion that they may be able to extend that through March. And so those timelines impact what we are able to do with some of our exemptions. Some things we have to ask for through what's called an 1135. Those things have to end around the time that the federal disaster ends. And so there's different time frame for that, as well as some of our emergency rules. So what we're doing is we're working to do a crosswalk for all of these exemptions that you have listed here. Where is that exemption? Because some of them are just in one place, some of them are in 2 or 3 places. And so the timeline for how long we can continue them is different. So we're working on a document that will show for each of these exemptions, this is where the exemption is. And then for each of these, what is our plan for individuals and families who are currently using that exemption to help them think through what we might need to do differently once we're not able to give those anymore. Or are there some things that we might want to continue on even after COVID as a different service? Now, if we do that, to be clear, if we change things, if we have anything we want to change and keep in our waiver that goes beyond COVID, then we have to actually do a real waiver amendment to be able to continue those. And those things have to fall within the regular rules. So for example, right now we have an extension that people can work beyond the 16-hour limit. That actually supersedes a rule by the Department of Labor. We would not be able to continue something like that long-term because something like that does have to end based on Department of Labor rules. So each exemption really we need to take a look at each one of those individually and where we could return. So what we're looking at doing is we have our ideas, we have our research that we've done, and we're looking at putting a work group together to help us kind of dive into the details of all of those. And so, again, we can pull people together. So I think that's what we were going to try to do here today, really, Brenton. But maybe, if folks here want to be included, and I see some chats with folks saying they'd like to be included, so we can include them on those work groups. Another thing that we are currently in the process of doing, we just developed a survey that went out to all of our support coordination agencies. And so the support coordinators have until August 10th. So we've given them a month. Anybody that's on waiver is going to be contacted by their support coordinator to participate in this survey. And the survey is really just having us try to get an idea from individuals and families who receive or participate in services, kind of what their feel is for returning, what their feel is related to some of the exemptions and some of the in-person face-to-face. Also trying to get us an idea. I know we've heard through our MDAC calls, there are a lot of folks that are pretty anxious and not being able to return to day programs or work. And so again, just trying to really get us a feel for where our waiver population and community stands on some things. So again, that outreach will happen. That is also going to help us as we look on these work groups at how we move forward based on the feedback that we're getting from families. And then finally, we are also doing a lot of work. Next week, we actually have meetings scheduled in all 10 regions that'll involve the local governing entities and our day program and vocational providers in those regions to be able to get feedback from them on a return or an opening again of some of our day programs. We do still have folks, if they have individual employment and no underlying conditions and wanted to go back to work, we can still have billable time for folks to engage in that. And so those have started, but we've not gotten permission from our state health officer yet, Dr. Guidry, to reopen those congregate facilities like our day programs. And so we've not allowed, he's not comfortable under phase 3 to allow us to have folks return to a physical location in those large groups. But once we get to phase 3, we can start to, consider possible options. And what does that need to look like? So those conversations with those providers will specific to kind of what those facilities need to be doing and thinking about will happen next week. So that's a high level overview, and I'll look at the chat and write down the names of the folks who said that they wanted to be on the committee to make sure that we include you guys. And I know we're short of time, but I don't know if there's any questions or if, again, those of you who said you wanted to be on the work group, I guess if you want to hold those thoughts and we can, vet them when we get on the work group.
Crystal does have her hand raised.
Go ahead, Crystal.
Quickly, Julie, you mentioned a crosswalk about where services would end and how people can navigate what they're doing right now with their waiver services and when it would end and when it would not, or when it could potentially end. When would that crosswalk be available? And thank you, by the way, for that. That's going to be most beneficial.
Yeah, well, the one that we actually have the crosswalk document finished. The thing that actually looks at, this is the exception and this is where it is. So I can probably send that out. The part that's not as clear on here is when each one of those ends. So I need to get that added to the doc.
Perfect.
It's fairly, the details of it are already there. We just need to add that to it.
Yeah, if I could just get that when you add when it ends or potentially ends, please.
Okay.
And as far as comments, we had one from Liz Gary, said she would like to participate in the work group. Also from Matt, he said the exemptions have been essential to home and community-based services providers and recipients. It's helped keep them safe and staffed, and he would also like to participate in the work group.
Okay.
All right, so that wraps up our agenda. Is there any other comments?
It looks like Crystal has her hand raised again.
Crystal.
Hey, Mike, for the TEFRA stakeholder group, we just got an email from Susan Meyer stating that there was going to be, they're going to do the public piece to get input on TEFRA. And there's 2 dates, but they're going to do it via Zoom. And I was wondering if we could make a motion to send that out to everyone on our, it's going to be on 7/22 and 7/27 when they're going to do the Zoom for everyone. If we can send that out as an action alert, since TEFRA was high on our agenda last year, and I think the public needs to give input on this and know where TEFRA is going.
Hey, this is Julie. If it's okay, if I comment, I don't know how to raise my hand on this bar.
You just did. Go ahead.
Okay, so just thanks, Crystal. We have actually developed flyers, and we have, I don't remember if I know for sure the flyer is going to be sent to DD Council. The flyer talks about, we're also developing things that are going to go out on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And so just alerting you guys that it might be held, I think Monday is when we will have the flyers to you guys. If y'all want to use the flyer, we'll give information about where to register and how to register for those.
Yeah, and as far as the council goes, we already have a plan to share everything and push everything out via social media and our listserv as well.
Is it going to go out as an action alert, or does that need to be in motion, Brenton?
No, it's going to go out either way. I don't think you have to make a motion. I don't know if it's necessarily an action alert as much as it'll be more like an info alert or just an LADDC news that says, hey, here's the info for you to register and participate. But yeah, it'll go out in the same kind of format that we send out our LADDC news, our action alerts and that stuff. So it'll go to everyone's emails.
I just don't want it to get lost with a bunch of other stuff in like a newsletter or anything. I think it needs to stand alone.
I mean, our listserv, we don't have a way really to distinguish it from one thing or another. Our listserv is just our listserv. Everybody, anything that gets pushed out, it goes to the same group. No matter if it's an action alert, LADDC news, it just all goes from the same inbox. So, I mean, I don't really have a way to distinguish it from other stuff that gets sent out. I don't know that we have anything else scheduled to be pushed out via people's emails. I don't know if any of the other staff are working on anything else, but.
Sure. So I'd just like to make a motion to request that we send the TEFRA public stakeholder input as an action alert.
Okay, Crystal, does language look okay to you?
Yes.
Okay, I can't read it all. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor by Crystal White, seconded, waiting on a second. The motion is for the committee to recommend sending Tephra public meeting information as an action alert to the council's listserv. Do we have a second?
It's Kim. I'll second it.
Okay, seconded by Kim. Is there any discussion? Any public comment? Any objection? Any abstention? Okay, the motion to recommend sending the Tephra public meeting information as action alert has passed. And we've ran late today, and I apologize for it. I'm approaching my hard limit. Got to be another meeting at 2:30. I'd like to thank everybody for being here today. It was, I think the one time I looked, we had approximately 30 people on Zoom and on YouTube. So that was good to see. If nobody has anything else, do we have a motion?
Mike.
I'll make a motion
Michael.
to adjourn.
When is the next meeting going to be held?
Council meeting?
Yes.
The full council meeting is, let me look, I got somebody on my calendar. Thursday on the 16th.
So that's in this month, right? Or next?
Yes, it's this week, actually, this coming week. And you should have an email with, you'll have to register beforehand.
Wait, what's the date?
It is on July the 16th.
I'll make a motion to adjourn this meeting.
A second.
Okay, we have a motion to adjourn in a second. Is there any discussion? Any public comment? Any objections? Any comments? The motion to adjourn is passed.
Bye-bye.
Bye, y'all. Thank you.
Later.
Bye.
Bye.